For joining us for day 2 of the CTO UNWTO workshops on tourism statistics. My name is Faye Gill. I am Director of Membership Services at the Caribbean Tourism Organization. So before we get into the official program for today, I wanted to share the following information with you. First, the program for today has been posted in the chat window for you to access, so you can download the program to follow along with where we are from the chat window. For the question and answer segment, we will be using the Zoom Q&A feature, so you can post your questions for the panelists there. However, if you wish to ask your question orally, you can use the raise hand feature, and one of the moderators will select you to take the floor to ask your question. Throughout today's program, there will be a series of Zoom polls, which will really be questions that we want to get your feedback on. And we will also be sharing the results of those polls. We do encourage you to participate when that time comes. The recording of the workshops and the presentations from today will be emailed to everyone who has registered at the address that you would have used for registration. So once again, thank you for joining us. And I would like now to hand over to our first presenter and your moderator for today, Hernan Epstein.
Thank you very much, Faye, for the very good presentation and making all the housekeeping rules clear. So this is the second day, as Faye mentioned, this is the second day of the workshop. Yesterday we had, I think, a very fruitful session, which focused more on use, some issues on production of data, of statistics as well, but it was more geared maybe towards policymakers. Also, it was interesting, I think, for the technical side, for data producers. Today, we will focus more on technical issues and data producers. My name is Hernan Epstein. I'm the Chief of Statistics of UNWTO. In terms of what Faye mentioned, there will be a few polls at the end of each item of the program. You can download the program, as Faye mentioned, on the chat, from the chat box. At the end of item 2, item 3, and so on, there will be a number of poll questions, and we will only see the results at the end in item 6, where we will have discussion and questions and answers. So we'll go through the results then. We will also answer questions at the end in the item 6, but we encourage you to post the questions during the whole workshop. You can post them and we'll pick them up later on question 6 to make a better on item 6 to make a better use of time. Having said this, we have a very full schedule today. So I would like to move on to item 2 on measuring the different forms of tourism, inbound, domestic, and outbound tourism. I will give the virtual floor to my colleague, Leandri Moreno. The floor is yours, Leandri.
Thank you very much, Hernan. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be with you all today. Let me share my presentation. Here we go. So in this short workshop, we are going to focus on official basic tourism statistics. The idea today is really to lay the foundations for a good measurement of the basic tourism statistics. Each session or module, let's say, will start in the same way. I will introduce a brief background information on theoretical aspects based on the international standards for measuring tourism, and then we'll follow a series of presentation on more practical aspects, in fact. So the audience is very wide today. I believe that some of the information that I will give is new for some of you, but for others may be a good reminder or recap, let's say. So let's start with the official documents containing the methodological frameworks for measuring tourism, and that was ratified by the UN. We have on one side the international recommendations for tourism statistics. They provide the main concepts, definition, and classification for the measurement of basic tourism statistics, and allows the collection of basic data and indicators. And then the other document, the Tourism Satellite Account Recommended Methodology Framework, goes a step further, as it provides the framework for the economic measurements of tourism, for example, in terms of tourism GDP, and is aligned with the national accounts. The International Recommendation for Tourism Statistics has also a compilation guide where it's focused more on data sources and methods to compile the basic data statistics. And this document allows for measuring tourism in a comparable way among countries and over time. Most recently, we have issued a conceptual guidance, let's say, a guidance document for the COVID context. So in this case, this document helps to clarify a bit the international recommendation for tourism statistics in terms of expenditure related to COVID, in terms of, for example, some establishment that closed down or not during COVID, and also in terms of arrivals. So in fact, the scope of today's workshop will be on the documents on the left side of the screen, and not so much on tourism satellite accounting. Of course, you can find all of these documents in the UNWTO webpage that you can see at the bottom of the slide. So for this module on the forms of tourism, specifically at the end, we will be able to differentiate between travel and tourism, to identify the main purposes of tourism trips, to distinguish between visitors and tourists, to delineate the usual environments, to differentiate between inbound, domestic, outbound, internal, national, and international tourism, to recognize the available data sources, and to understand the measurement of yacht tourism. So, as you know, travel and tourism is not the same thing. In fact, let me check. Travel refers to the activity of a traveler, while tourism refers to the activity of visitors. A traveler is someone who moves between different geographic locations for any purpose and for any duration. A visitor is a traveler taking a trip to a main destination outside his or her usual environment for less than a year and for any main purpose, business, leisure, or other personal purpose, other than to be employed by a resident entity in the country or place visited. So these trips taken by visitors qualify as tourism trips, and so tourism refers to the activity of visitors. So we can see here several criteria for defining tourism: usual environment, main purpose, and of course, less than a year. So let's see one by one. So first of all, the differences between visitors and tourists, because it's not, of course, the same thing. A visitor becomes a tourist when he or she makes an overnight stay, while a visitor who does not make an overnight stay is called an excursionist. So in fact, visitors are tourists and excursionists. And most of the time, of course, as you know, cruise passengers are excursionists, not tourists, provided that they don't spend the night inland, of course. So in terms of main purposes that allows for that are considered for tourism trips, we can see two kinds of purposes: personal one and business and professional. In personal purposes, we have, of course, the typical ones: holiday, leisure, and recreations. So this category includes, for example, sightseeing, attending sporting events, honeymooning, cruising, or staying in vacation homes. We have visiting friends and relatives also, attending weddings or funeral, or caring for somebody sick. This in particular can be relevant during the COVID pandemic. We have also education and training. This would include also short-term courses or following a specific program of study, or even a university sabbatical leave will enter in this category. There is also health and medical care. So this includes, for example, receiving services from hospitals or clinics, or visiting place to receive special medical treatments. So in the COVID context, this also purpose can be relevant, because this means that any person with COVID traveling or being transferred to a hospital outside his usual environment will be considered tourism. And also now we see that there are some destinations that open a new segment on COVID vaccination. This will also be included as in this item of health and medical care. We have religion and pilgrimage, of course, shopping. Transit here means that you have to go outside you have to enter the legal territory, don't have to stay in the airport. And others means, like, for example, investigative work or any kind of this volunteer work also. Business and professional. So this category includes activities of both the self-employed and employees, as long as they don't have an implicit or explicit relationship with an employer, with a resident entity in the country or in the place visited. Of course, what are not considered tourism is any kind of workers with an implicit or explicit relationship with an entity resident in the country or in the place. Here, long-term means a year or more. Nomads and refugees, transit passengers, those not entering the economic and legal territory, cruise on public modes of transport, persons entering to establish their residence, long-term students and patients, and other travelers deemed not to enter the economic territory, such as diplomat, consular staff, or personnel, military personnel, and their dependents also. So another criterion to define tourism is the usual environment. It has to be outside the usual environment of an individual. So what does it mean? So it's the geographical area, not necessarily a contiguous one, within which an individual conducts his or her regular life routines, let's say place of work, of study, any place visited regularly, even if it's located far away, such as shopping centers or visiting homes and family and friends or healthcare facilities. However, this is a particular case because it doesn't be possible to operationalize statistically this definition. So what is recommended is to use different criteria to delineate the usual environment. We have frequency and duration of the trip. These are the main important. The crossing of administrative or national borders, and distance from the place of usual residence. Of course, among those four criteria, it's up to each country to define them. Frequency can be once a week or once a month, the duration in terms of number of hours, and the distance, of course, that will be different from one country, big to a small one. So I imagine that the establishment of these criteria in small island can be a challenge, in fact, and I will be happy to hear about this on your side. So I think we are finished with the different criteria, and now we are going to see the different forms of tourism. I guess you all know that, but it's a good reminder. So as you know, inbound tourism refers to the activity of a non-resident visitor within the country of reference. This means that any national living abroad that comes to your country is tourism, inbound tourism. Domestic tourism refers to the activities of a resident visitor within the country of reference, so national or not national. And outbound tourism, the activities of a resident visitor outside the country of reference. So what is important here to know in terms of terminology is that international tourism, it's not equivalent to inbound tourism. It's in fact inbound and outbound. And this is, applies the same logic as international trade, in fact, because international trade is import plus export. But in the case of tourism, it's not the products that moves, it's the consumer, in fact. National and internal tourism, let's see the differences. So internal tourism corresponds to both inbound and domestic tourism. Here, the perspective is the country of reference. And national tourism corresponds to both domestic and outbound. And here the perspective is a resident visitor of the country. So what do we want to measure regarding the different form of tourism? I'm going to be very brief with this because Hernan, my colleague, yesterday also already mentioned this. And because I imagine that a lot of you know this very well, as you are our main providers of data. And by the way, thank you very much for this. So the main measures on inbound tourism are arrivals, of course, visitors arrivals, broken down by region, by main purpose that we have seen quite recently, the mode of transport, by mode of organization of the trip. So here we have the terminology on package tour, which means tourism product. We will see it a bit later today. Developed and provided by a tour operator, can sell it directly or through tourism agencies, travel agencies. Travelers on package tours receive a combination of tourism trips and products, transportation, accommodation, food and beverage services, sightseeing or entertainment, for example. We have also some data on accommodation. Here it's the commercial accommodation establishments, and then we have the declaration on hotel and similar establishment. Expenditure data that will be covered by Hernan in the next session, and some indicator on the average size of travel party. A travel party is a group of visitors traveling together that pools their expenses, their expenditure. We have also average length of stay and average expenditure per day. Of course, all of these data and indicators, they are meant for international comparability purposes. In terms of domestic tourism, the main data and indicators relate to the trip. To the trip of resident tourists and excursionists. They are broken down by main purpose, mode of transport, form of organization, accommodation, and then the indicators, the same as for inbound. Outbound, the focus is on departure of visitors, of course, and on expenditure. And we have also some indicators on the average length of stay or average expenditure per day. So this was the basic list of data and indicators that UNWTO compiles for international comparability purposes. Now we are going to see very briefly some possible data sources for these indicators. So on inbound tourism, of course, not all of them are listed here. It will depend heavily on the country statistical system. But the main important can be, for example, on inbound tourism administrative data, the typical immigration records, entry and departure cards, transport operator records, such as the chip manifest that could be relevant in the Caribbean region. Of course, the main important are also surveys, either at borders, at accommodation establishment, or attraction places. Big data can provide us elements on mobile network operators and booking platform. For domestic tourism, the main will be the household surveys, but also it can be useful to see surveys at accommodation establishment and at attraction places. And big data, also the same as for inbound, on mobile network operators and booking platform. And for outbound, administrative data can also be relevant, the immigration records, of course, and the transport operator records, and also the surveys, notably the household surveys or the surveys at borders. But regarding all these data sources, it's very important to bear in mind some consideration, in fact. So how reliable are they? Do they have a good coverage or do they have timing issues? Are they based on a census or on a sample? Are they conducted regularly or irregularly? Are they available on a consistent basis over time? And do definitions match with the concepts, of course? But in fact, it's important to bear in mind what was the purpose behind the data. Are the data designed for one purpose but used for another? Here, this typically relates to administrative data, of course, and big data versus tourism surveys because administrative data and big data are not designed and it's not their primary purpose to be used for the production of tourism statistics. So to finish, we are very briefly going to see the main steps for the implementation of a border survey, as it's one of the main sources for tourism flow. These figures set out step by step the process for implementing a border survey and highlight some relevant issues. And this figure comes from the IRTS compilation guide. You can have access to it through the link at the bottom of the slide. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go step by step. This will be typically something that we will cover in a longer capacity building programs. But as you can see, there's a lot. And the first step, of course, is the setting up of the institutional cooperation that I mentioned briefly yesterday, and the use of good concept definition and classification that is the scope of today's workshop as well. Also, in terms of guidance, there is an available questionnaire in the compilation guide. So I think if you want to start with a survey or to improve your own survey, a good starting point is to check the information and the guidance available in the compilation guide. I think I'm finished for this background information on theoretical aspects related to the measurement of the different forms of tourism. Please feel free to use the question and answer feature. I will be happy to respond to your question, and also feel free to share your own experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leandri, for the excellent presentation. I think this will set the groundwork for the rest of the workshop, because there are some very important definitions and concepts that were defined now. I will now pass the virtual floor to Kevin Millington. He will talk about measuring a specific segment of tourism, the measuring yacht visitors. Kevin.
Thank you very much, Hernan. Thank you, and hello again, everybody. Once again, delighted to be here and to be connected with you. Let me just put this onto big screen, so hopefully you can all see it, and hopefully I'm going to get my slideshow to work properly today. So yeah, so when measuring yacht visitors, when I was talking to Hernan and Leandri at the beginning, when this whole workshop was being planned, it struck me that this was an area that was probably worth focusing on. Just quick background, about 3 years ago, some of my colleagues who are listening in will recall, as part of an OECS project, we looked at measuring inbound air visitors, cruise visitors and yacht visitors in the OECS region and individual countries. And really it's drawing on the findings from that, and also work that I've done elsewhere in the South Pacific and the South Atlantic, places like the Falkland Islands. And yacht visitors are very important, and in the OECS and probably most islands in the Caribbean, they will come second after international air visitors in terms of expenditure, and way ahead of cruise visitors in a lot of countries. And so, you know, they're very significant, but often, you know, there's very little research and very little work done on measuring yacht visitors and their expenditure. So I thought we'd just have a very quick session on this for what we've learned, and just look at you know, how this can be addressed, because it can be a big omission in our inbound tourist measurement in terms of expenditure and visitors. Excuse me. Right, well, compared to visiting, arrivals visiting by air and by cruise, we've got some big differences. When we've got arrivals by cruise and by air, we know when they're going to depart. And of course, when we do our surveys, that's when we do it. When departures at an airport, departures on a dock, just as cruise visitors go back on board. This tends to be when we survey them just before they depart our islands. With these types of visitor, we also know where they're going, because we know where the aircraft is flying to, we know where the cruise ship is going to be going to next, we know its schedule, we know how long people have stayed. Well, we do if they're cruise visitors, they've normally stayed a day. We know when they've arrived and when they're departing. And also, we might be party to manifests, cruise manifests of passengers, so we might know a little bit about their nationality, about their age, about their gender. So we're in a much stronger position when we're measuring cruise and air visitors, because we have this structure. We know when they're going to arrive, when they're going to depart. They're a part of a scheduled trip. And that, of course, makes things a lot easier as far as organising our surveys. Now, yacht visitors, we don't know when they're going to arrive. And we don't know when they're going to leave. And they probably don't know when they're going to leave as well, which is not exactly helpful. We don't know where they've come from. They might have come from an island or country many, many thousands of miles away. They might have just come from another island just neighbouring. We don't know how many people are on board. So it's very irregular the way they arrive in our countries. And of course, this is what makes measuring them so very difficult. Now, this slots nicely into what Leandri's just been talking about. Three very quick definitions on what a yacht visitor is. What are we actually measuring here? Well, first of all, they're arriving on a yacht. They may stay over for a day, or they may stay overnight. And as Leandri's just said, as long as they spend less than a year, then we're going to include them in our visitors. statistics. Their usual country of residence has to be a country other than the one they're visiting, the country we're measuring from. So we're not measuring residents here, we're measuring inbound yacht visitors from other countries. Now, this is the key one. This is the one I wanted to focus on. All persons on board the yacht are considered visitors. Now, that includes the crew. Now, very subtly in one of Leandri's slides, it said crews of public modes of transport are excluded. And that's absolutely right, of course, because when we don't include crews of aircraft, we don't include crews of cruise ships in our statistics. And that's because they're scheduled, they're public scheduled modes of transport. But yachts, when we're dealing with yachts, they're not on a schedule, and they're privately units of transport, if you like, and so we include all persons on board. Now, considering we're not sure when they're going to arrive, and they will come and they will tie up on a buoy or in a marina and just disperse, finding yacht visitors, of course, is probably a really tricky thing. It's not like when we're doing air visitor surveys or cruise visitor surveys where we know exactly where they are. They're in an airport lounge, or they're on the dock about to reboard the cruise ship. So when we did the work in the OECS, every country I visited, colleagues there were very in the Ministry of Tourism or wherever. Generally, they could answer my question. I'd say, where do yacht visitors hang out? And pretty much always they were able to say, well, there's a yacht club, or there's these cafes and bars near the marinas, or the marina themselves, or there's an internet cafe, or there's laundries, or whatever. So I think it's always reasonably easy to identify certain places where yacht visitors tend to go to. And they're the places we need to go to find them. They're the places we need to go to interview them. We can't wait till their trip is over, till they're about to jump on their yacht and sail away, because we just don't know when that will be. It's not practical. So to measure yacht visitors, we need to identify the places where they hang out, where they spend time. And these are some of the places which are very typical. Then we need to think about our survey. Now, there's one big consideration in the survey, and that is we will be interviewing them not at the end of their trip, or highly unlikely at the end of the trip. We'll be interviewing them at some point during their trip. And so we need to take that into consideration when we undertake the survey. We need to make sure that we know how far into the trip they are and how much longer they expect to stay. Because when we project their expenditure, we're going to need to know that. So that's a different thing here with yacht visitor surveys. We're not interviewing at the end of the trip, unlike the cruise and air visitor surveys. Now, there's a few critical questions. Of course, in the questionnaire, you can ask whatever questions you want. You can ask questions about how much they've liked your destination, what they've done, and so on. But I've just identified a few critical questions here, and most of them are related to expenditure. And these are the questions which are very much different to a cruise or air visitor survey. Now, obviously, we need to know their usual country of residence, so we know whether they're bona fide inbound visitor. We need to know how many people are on the yacht, because this is very important, and they'll probably, but may not, they might want to talk about their expenditure as everyone on their yacht. They might want to just report their own expenditure, and that's fine, but it's useful, but we need to know the total number of people on the yacht that we're talking about. Now, the expenditure on yacht visitor surveys needs to be broken into two groups. This is the first group. Now, this is the sort of expenditure we'd typically ask the cruise visitor survey, or indeed, to an extent, an air visitor survey. So it's a sort of expenditure which is sort of daily. It's how much did you spend on food and drink? How much did you spend on local transport? How much did you spend on shopping, attractions, telephone, internet? It's the sort of expenditure which, the longer they stay, the more they're likely to spend. It's a sort of expenditure which they do on a daily basis. They might not do all of it every day. They may not spend money on shopping every day, but it's a continual thing. And so this is the expenditure we need to measure for the period they've stayed in the country, and then we'll project it forward for as long as they expect to stay. We'll have to make that assumption that their average daily expenditure up to the point we interview them will be continued as we go forward. So that's the first type of expenditure. The other type of and we need to know how many nights they've been in the country and how many more nights they expect to be in the country. Now, that's going to have to be, we're going to have to take their word for that and their project. They may not know. They may say, well, I'm thinking I'll be here for another week, or it might be 10 days, but they may stay a bit longer. But we have to base it on what they're expecting to do. And then we can make that projection. The other type of expenditure is what I would call sort of one-off expenditure. Now, when yachts come into a country, apologies for this, it's not a bore repair, it's a boat repair. We're not mentioning pigs here. So when they come into a country where they may have they may have to stay in accommodation because either they want to or because they're having some repairs made. They may be taking on fuel or water. They may have some mooring or other yacht-related fees. They may be provisioning and buying large amounts of food for ongoing journey. Now, all of these 5 items of expenditure, they are what I would call one-off. They will probably only have one repair, if any, one loading of fuel and water, one big provisioning, one mooring fees. It's the length of their stay does not have an impact on this expenditure. It is something they will either do or they will not. And so this is something we will ask, have you spent any money on these items, or do you intend to spend any money on these items? And then after that, their length of stay, we don't bring, is irrelevant to this expenditure. It's a one-time only spend. So just to finish off, really some implementation tips. Survey in the yachting season. Don't do your survey when there's no yachts coming in. And the yachting season, as you know, broadly coincides with the cruise season. Get to know the best places to interview and use them. Find out where yachters hang out. Set a schedule when interviewers will visit the identified sites. It's very easy because you haven't got a plane coming in or leaving, you haven't got a cruise ship leaving, to just sort of say, oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow. You know, set a schedule when interviewers will go to the locations and try and find, because that's what it is. It's a hunting gathering sort of exercise when they will try and find respondents. Hit rate may be low. You know, you may end up with just 4 interviews in an afternoon, but allow for that. Don't be depressed that you've only got 4 interviews. You know, it's not, you're not getting the same sort of hit rate you would expect at an airport or on a cruise ship when we're interviewing cruise ship passengers. The good news is that yachters are usually very willing to be interviewed. They're very rarely in a rush. You know, you don't get the same issues as sort of you get in airports and before people aboard a cruise ship. Tend to be extremely relaxed and willing to talk to you. And if you're looking at your sample size, 100 interviews over a whole season will yield good results. These visitors are quite homogeneous in the way they behave, they spend, and so on. So you don't, you know, as far as you don't need to segment them to, you know, within an inch of their lives, just that you can deal with them as a group, and 100 interviews will give you a reasonably good results. I mean, obviously the more the better, but that should give you some good expenditure data. And finally, as I said, there's not a lot of work being done on yachting and yacht expenditure, but just as an example, this in-depth survey that was done in Fiji showed that visitors were spending £3,600 per person. That's, you know, that's on all the expenditure that they made when their yacht was in port. So 721 yachts, this was done about 2 or 3 years ago, that visited Fiji in that year, spent $17 million US. So, you know, it is significant, but there's no doubt about it. Yachting is significant, and it's one of those things where some yachts, yes, they do behave like they're in a caravan and they're not spending much money and they're very frugal, but there are equally other yachts which are provisioning, buying a lot of goods, buying fuel, spending a lot of money, and on average, it really brings the total expenditure up. So I hope that's been useful. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking, and back over to you, Hernan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. This was, I think, a very useful, very hands-on presentation on something, a subject that is very, very relevant for the region, of course, and very, very interesting as well. Well, now we will move on to the first country presentation we have today. I will hand on the floor to Mr. Les Warner from Trinidad and Tobago, who will talk about a very interesting issue, measuring arrivals from the perspective of a twin island nation. He will give the perspective of Tobago. Mr. Warner, the floor is all yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Les Warner, and I'm representing the Tobago Tourism Agency. And this morning, I'm going to be presenting on measuring the different forms of tourism from the unique perspective of Tobago, being from a twin island state. Now, the outline of my presentation this morning is going to follow the form of a background. I'm going to give you some information on domestic tourism in Trinidad and Tobago, the challenges we face in inbound tourism and its measurements, exit surveys, and some potential solution to our issues. So for those of you who may not be familiar, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is a twin island state, and Tobago is politically linked to Trinidad and is the smaller of the two islands with 116 square miles. The population of Tobago is basically 65,000, whereas in Trinidad, it's 1.3 million. In Trinidad, where oil might be the main driver of the economy, in Tobago, it is tourism. And at this point, I'd just like to state that Tobago and Trinidad is managed separately by the Tobago Tourism Agency, is responsible for the management and marketing of the Tobago tourism industry, whereas in Trinidad, the Trinidad Tourism Agency is responsible for the management and the marketing of Trinidad. And in Tobago, our current brand is Tobago Beyond Ordinary, and our product is currently centered around 4 main pillars, which are romance and weddings, sea and beaches, people, culture and heritage, and ecotourism. Now, as we move into domestic tourism, it is important to state that the definition of tourism to Tobago is basically, or widely regarded as, the movement of Trinidadians from Trinidad to Tobago. And we in Trinidad and Tobago basically enjoy a very strong domestic tourism industry due to the close proximity of the islands and the inter-island transportation means available. By air, it generally takes 20 minutes from Trinidad to Tobago and vice versa. And by sea, it takes 2.5 hours between the two islands. On average, annually, by ferry, we receive 250,000 passenger arrivals, and by air, we receive 500,000 passenger arrivals. Now, when it comes to the measurement of domestic tourism in the industry, or in Tobago, it is much more difficult to track than international tourism. Despite the means of transport being by plane and sea, because you cannot drive to Tobago from Trinidad, it's still difficult to measure the domestic travel from Trinidad to Tobago because there are no reporting mechanisms currently available on the domestic bridge. Therefore, the only form of measurement we have currently available is that of surveys, but it only provides an estimate. And later on in the presentation, I'm going to give you some potential solutions that we may have to our issue as it regards to the measurement of domestic tourism to Tobago. Now, when it comes to inbound tourism, some of you may not be familiar, but there are 2 international airports in Trinidad and Tobago. The A&R Robinson International Airport in Tobago and the Piaco International Airport in Trinidad. In Trinidad and Tobago, however, arrivals are recorded by the first point of entry. And with Piaco International Airport generally being the parent airport for Trinidad and Tobago, all international flights passes through Trinidad, except the direct flights which are chartered to Tobago, such as the Virgin, the BA, the Sunwing Airlines recently, all other flights are required to pass through Trinidad. Now, on average, because of this issue, the direct stopover arrivals for Trinidad is 350,000, whereas for Tobago, it's 20,000. Now, while that number may seem typically small in comparison to Trinidad, it should be noted that this number is grossly underestimated because of the reporting mechanisms or the lack of reporting mechanism on the domestic air and sea bridge, as well as the in-transit pool. Now, where as a collective, the measurement of inbound tourism to the island may not be an issue, when it comes to measuring the island performance on a separate basis, this in turn presents a challenge and major disadvantage for Tobago. Now, I would have stated previously that since Piaco is the main parent airport and all arrivals passes through Trinidad, you are required to first stop in Trinidad before transiting on to Tobago. As a result, the immigration department, once you land in Trinidad, they usually record you as a Trinidad stopover. It doesn't matter if your intended address or place of stay is Tobago, but they are required to land you as a Trinidad stopover. So that is how the stopover arrivals for Tobago now is underestimated or undervalued, as these are usually recorded as Trinidad stopovers. Now, some of the issues we have, as I highlighted before, is that most of the international flights land in Trinidad. There are no reporting mechanism on the domestic air or sea bridge. So if you land into Trinidad, you are not required to go on a domestic flight via Caribbean Airlines to come to Tobago, and the lack of the reporting mechanism on that air bridge, that means that passenger to Tobago is completely missed. There are also no transfer desks or transit desks in the Piaco International Airport for individuals who land and have intentions of staying in Tobago. Now, issue number 3 is that the immigration department in Trinidad and Tobago record arrivals by nationality. Now, this is a fundamental issue because when it comes to the diaspora markets, they are recorded as returning residents, and this further understates Trinidad and Tobago's arrival statistics on a whole. Now, when it comes to the exit surveys, now these are conducted on an annual basis. The methodology we adopt is a convenient sampling method, which is a non-probability sampling method. And we adopt this sampling method because the enumerators at the airport, they typically try to capture as much visitors as possible. And these surveys generally represent approximately 15% of departed visitors. Because at this point, some of them are not willing to answer, some of them are busy. As Kevin was saying earlier, the yacht visitors are much more relaxed, so they're more willing to answer these surveys. And these surveys mainly covered visitors' motivation for travel. We like to know how they plan their trip, the product satisfaction, and expenditure, which generally offers a challenge because some visitors prefer to answer or they cannot remember. Because the average length of stay for a visitor in Tobago is 2 weeks. And to accurately recall at this point how much money you spend on the destination over a 2 weeks period, they cannot remember exactly what they spent on. Some of us cannot even remember how much money we would have spent over the past week. So this in terms offers a challenge. Additionally, being a Twin Island state, some of these visitors might also visit Trinidad for 2 to 3 days and then come back to Tobago via the ferry or the plane. Now, when they are given their expenditure, because they are not aware of the differences, while some of this money might be spent in Trinidad, they will still give it for Tobago and vice versa. Of the visitor who is in Trinidad and now decides to come over to Tobago and spend some of that expenditure in Tobago, now that is not captured as well. So those are some of the issues we face with measuring arrivals in Tobago. Now, in terms of solutions, when it comes to domestic tourism, whereas in some areas, this is done by driving or train and cannot be measured accurately beyond surveys, because our domestic tourism occurs to the point at a border, whereas at the port, the seaport or the airports. Now, one of the solutions that we can adopt is a color tagging procedure. So, for example, I gave you all passenger arrivals. So we can adopt a system where the passenger is now color tagged according to where they are from. So if you are from Trinidad, we can adopt a red tag. If you are from Tobago, you can be issued a green tag. And if you are international, you can be issued a blue tag. So instead of just stating that 1,000, for example, 1,000 passengers would have traveled to Tobago in February, we can now disaggregate this data by the tags. So if there are 600 tags, we can see 600 Trinidadians would have visited Tobago, 300 Tobagonians, and 100 internationals. And that will go far in terms of informing the policymakers and marketing specialists of the things that they need to adopt in order to further improve domestic tourism to Tobago. And as well, there can also be a mandatory data collection at the time or the purchase of the ticket. So instead of just knowing whether these individuals are from Trinidad, Tobago, or international, we can now have demographic data in terms of age, gender, where they are coming from, and why they are visiting Tobago. So at different points in time, we can also market to these segments. Now, when it comes to inbound tourism, it is important that we institute a transfer desk in Trinidad. So for example, if a visitor lands in Trinidad and is coming across to Tobago, they must first check in at this transit desk, and clients or agents at this desk will now be able to state that of the 1,000 passengers that would have, or 100 passengers that would have disembarked from a flight, 20 of those would have transited onto Tobago. And that's how we as Tobagonians will now be able to correctly state our arrival statistics. Additionally, the immigration department should not only record visitors by nationality, but country of residence, so that we can be able to count the diaspora market. And when it comes to exit surveys, I think Kevin was the one who was speaking about the immigration card yesterday and segmenting the market. And with inbound tourism, we know the majority of visitors will have taken vacation in their main reason for a visit. Now, the time may have come for us to change this card and adapt it in ways where, furthermore from just capturing information of the visitor to visit, on departure, we can maybe now expand the card to ask probably 5 to 10 questions that we would have typically have in exit surveys in terms of like their satisfaction, how they would have booked, just general exit survey questions that we can now make mandatory, as opposed to doing face-to-face surveys on the card when they are departing. And obviously the tourism satellite accounts will help to capture some of this data with individuals spending in Trinidad, individuals spending in Tobago, and be able to more accurately capture expenditure. And that is it from my side, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warner, for the excellent presentation. Some very important issues, and some issues that I think also can be useful for many other countries in the region. I wanted to make a small clarification. I see there's somebody with the raised hand. It's okay, Mr. Rommel Richmond. Please leave the raised hand, the hand raised. I just wanted to clarify that we will be having discussions on the question and answer item. So we'll continue with these with the presentations. We also have the Q&A. I see there's already a couple of questions in the Q&A box, and we will tend to this in the item 6 on questions and answers. So if you want to raise your hand, please raise it, leave it raised, and we will go. We'll get back to you on item 6. Now I would like to see if it's possible. We came to the ending of item 2 on measuring the different forms of tourism. So I would like to see if it's possible to launch a poll. We will have a couple of questions in the poll that I would ask everyone. I would encourage everyone to respond to, please. We will leave them up for 2 to 3 minutes, and we will go back and see the results also on item 6 in the questions and answers. So please take your time and respond to the questions. Thank you. We'll leave it open for 1 more minute and then we'll continue. Thank you very much. I think we have a very good response rate. We have 73% of attendees that have responded. So I think we can close the poll now and we can move on. We'll go back to the results later on in item 6. We can move on now to item 3 on a very relevant issue, of course, estimating tourism expenditure. I will again pass the floor to my colleague Leandri, who will go over the main concepts, definitions, and classifications, and also the main data sources for tourism measurement. Leandri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hernan. So here we go. So we move on the estimating tourism expenditure module. So as I told you in my first presentation, I will give a brief background information on theoretical aspects based on the IRTS. At the end of the module, we will be able to recognize what is included in tourism expenditure, to record the expenditure at the appropriate moment, to identify the main categories of tourism expenditures, to identify also the main data sources, and also to distinguish between tourism expenditure and balance of payments data. So what is tourism expenditure? It corresponds to the amount paid for the acquisition of consumption goods and services, as well as valuables for own use or to give away for and during tourism trips. So this means, for example, that tourism expenditure made before the trip that is only related to the trips, such as clothes, travel guides, travel insurance, or now with the COVID pandemic, antigen test or PCR test will be included as tourism expenditure. It's important also to take into consideration that tourism expenditure includes the expenditures by visitors themselves, as well as expenses that are paid for or reimbursed by others. So for example, when somebody goes on a business trip, accommodation or food that are paid by the employer is also considered tourism expenditures. And so it's important that respondents are aware of this when responding to a survey on tourism expenditure. So there are different categories of tourism expenditure, domestic, inbound, and outbound. And they are based on the country of residence of the transactors involved. So domestic tourism expenditure corresponds to the expenditure of a resident visitor within the economy of reference. What is important to take into account is that expenditure within the economy of reference of resident visitor on domestic trips is not domestic tourism expenditure if the product purchased is provided by a non-resident entity. Then we have inbound tourism expenditure, which is the tourism expenditure of a non-resident visitor within the economy of reference. And here, for example, it can be interesting for policy making purposes to compare the expenditures made with resident contractors with those not made with the resident contractors. We have also outbound tourism expenditures, which is the tourism expenditure of a resident visitor outside the economy of reference. So the issue of timing of tourism expenditure is very relevant, as often items such as accommodation or transportation are paid before being consumed. The time of recording of tourism expenditures is fully aligned with the national accounts. It refers to the moment of the transfer of ownership of goods or that of the delivery of services, not at the time of the payment. So this means that expenditure on transport services occurs when being transported, on accommodation services when staying in the place of accommodation, on travel agency services when the information is provided and the travel services are booked. Services paid for in advance, but then cancelled or postponed, are therefore not included independently if they have been partially, totally, or not reimbursed. In the case of the prepaid services being converted into a voucher, the associated expenditure should be recorded when the voucher is used. So arises the question on when we shall measure tourism expenditure. At the point of departure from the country of residence for inbound tourism, at the point of arrival in the country of residence for outbound tourism, and after completion of the trip for domestic tourism. As we can see, this is a bit difficult for yacht tourism. And why? They are these best moments because in that moment, visitors are best able to answer questions about their expenditure at the moment of conclusion of the trip and not at the beginning when a large portion of the expenditure is still to be made. So how to classify tourism expenditure? It is recommended to classify it according to its purpose because it's easier for the respondents to identify it. It has also the advantage to be aligned with the International Classification of Individual Consumption by Purpose, COICOP, and this classification, COICOP, is widely used in household surveys and on statistics on personal consumption in general. So the categories are package travel, package holidays and package tours, accommodation, food and drink, local transport, international transport, recreation, culture and sporting, shopping, and other. Here, maybe the most challenging one is the first one on packages, because we know that packages involve different products and services which are supplied by different providers, and visitors only know the total amount and some of the components. As a consequence, the total cost of a package reported by a visitor needs to be broken down. This will allow for comparison and analysis of the level and the structure of the expenditure, whether they are on travel package or not. And this can be used by using information collected directly from the packagers themselves or from the travel agencies through supply surveys, for example. So here, a quick, very brief list of possible data sources for expenditure data. Not all of them, of course. In terms of surveys, of course, we can use data from surveys at borders, household surveys, or guest surveys, or supply surveys, as I told you for package tour. Big data also can be used as a good data sources, notably the payment card data and prices of tourism products, hotel prices or flight tickets, for example. So regarding survey questionnaires on expenditure, you can find the basic questionnaire for measuring the flows and the expenditures on the compilation guide that I mentioned earlier. I think I finished my quick presentation on the theoretical aspects of measuring tourism expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leandri, for the very good presentation and setting the tone for this item. I will now make a brief presentation on the differences between tourism expenditure as defined by Leandri and expenditure data coming from balance of payments. I will be brief. I will try to be as brief as possible because we have also three country presentations that I think are also probably the most interesting to look at. So I'll now start my presentation. One second. One second. Cannot see. One second, please. I cannot seem to find now the presentation. Let's see. Okay, there it is. Okay. I will first talk about how balance of payments is used often as a proxy for inbound and outbound tourism expenditure, for international tourism expenditure. I will compare the different categories and between the two sources of data, and I will go into the differences between these sources as well. This you've already seen today, as Leandri showed. From UNWTO, we collect data on expenditure at the total level, total expenditure, and disaggregated into travel and passenger transport. This is data that we collect actually from balance of payment. It's not data that we collect from countries regarding tourism expenditure itself, but it comes from balance of payment. Why do we do this? The main reason is that data for balance of payment is available for most of the countries in the world, while expenditure data on inbound and outbound, when in this case is for inbound, on inbound tourism expenditure is not so readily available. So this is one of the main advantages of using balance of payment, and often it's used as a proxy. But we have to be aware that there are conceptual differences in this type of data. So if you look first at the categories of inbound and outbound tourism expenditure that Leandri already mentioned, we look at these two items from balance of payment, which of course are focused on international expenses. These are travel and passenger transport. The first thing we have to notice is that tourism expenditure also covers domestic expenditure, which is in principle not covered by balance of payments. If we try to do a correspondence between these categories of expenditure, we can see that travel packages, accommodation, food and drink, local transport, recreational, cultural and sport activities, shopping and others would go conceptually, let's say for now, under the travel item, while international transport will go conceptually under the passenger transport item. However, like I said, there are differences between these two sources of data. The first difference is one that Leandri mentioned in her first presentation. There are differences in the scope of people who are considered in the calculation of these two variables. Like we said, tourism is not the same as travel, and balance of payment uses a closer definition to what is travel and tries to measure more travel, not so much tourism itself. So it includes also, for example, expenses by border workers, seasonal workers, other short-term workers, long-term workers, nomads and refugees. This if they are if they're going to the country for less than 1 year. Transit passengers not entering the economic and legal territory. Other travelers deemed not to enter the economic territory are not included in the travel item of balance of payment. And of course, they're not included either on tourism, while tourism measures only the inbound visitors. Of course, visitors are also included in the balance of payment. This is where the overlap is between tourism and travel. But as you can see here, you can see a short table summarizing what is included and what is not. As you can see, diplomats, consultant staff, military personnel, and their dependents are not included in either balance of payments or in tourism from a conceptual point of view. Border workers, seasonal workers, and other short-term workers and crews are considered in travel, but not in tourism. Well, crew actually are considered as visitors, except for regular as well as occasional crews on public modes of transportation. Like it was mentioned and underlined by both Kevin and Leandri previously. Students and patients are included in travel, and in tourism, only those that are doing this for the short term. And like I said, nomad refugees and displaced persons are included in travel if they're staying for less than a year. And in tourism, they're not included. So this is the first main difference between travel from the balance of payment and tourism from a conceptual point of view. There's a difference in the scope of the persons considered. In addition to this, there is also a difference in the scope of expenditures that are covered. And this has to do more specifically with a travel item. I'm not talking yet about the passenger transport item, but more about the travel item. As you can see, there are some differences that are explained here in this table. The main difference is, as I think, is that the travel item includes transactions on goods and services that do not imply a monetary transaction and represent social transfers in kind or require imputations. For example, what it is people from country A who go to country B to stay in their own second home, so they don't spend money on accommodation in that case. That on the travel item of balance of payment is imputed and it's counted, but under tourism expenditure is not under tourism expenditure. However, there's a different concept within the international recommendations for tourism statistics, which is tourism consumption, that do cover these estimations. And you can see there are also other differences that you can find between the two. Now, if you look at the passenger transport item and the difference, especially with international passenger transport from tourism expenditure, that category, the main difference comes from most of the time from where this expenditure is counted. Balance of payment counts the expenditure as an export or credit for the country of residence of the carrier. Similarly, it only counts imports debits if a resident books with a non-resident carrier, regardless of the destination. So in this sense, what matters is the residence of the carrier, not the country of destination. So for example, a person from country A could be doing a domestic trip, but booking a flight within the country with a foreign carrier. That balance of payment would count it as an import or debit, while in tourism, that would be domestic tourism expenditure. It would not be outbound tourism expenditure. Like I mentioned, tourism expenditure counts the amount as inbound tourism expenditure for the country of destination, without taking into account where the carrier resides, and outbound as the country of residence of the traveler of course, always taking into account that the traveler is a visitor as well, as defined by Leandri before. So we can look at this with an example and see how this will be computed in both in balance of payment and in the concept of tourism expenditure. An example where a visitor that resides in country A goes to country B on vacation by air, and the airline is, for example, from country C, a third country. How would that be computed? Under balance of payment, we would record a debit or import under country A for the value of the expenditure of the ticket, and a credit export in country C. So in the carrier of in the country of residence of the carrier, not on country B where the visitor is going. In terms of tourism expenditure, if you look at it from the tourism expenditure point of view, country A will record the value of the ticket as outbound in country A, and in country B, it will be counted as inbound. So you can see there's a difference here in how this can be computed. And these are things that one needs to take into account when we analyze data from balance of payment and interpret it as tourism expenditure data. This is an interesting example, I thought. This is the case of Ireland, where you can see in red, you can see the amount from the balance of payment from the travel item, and in blue from the passenger transport item. As you know, in Ireland, there's one very big airline, Ryanair, which is very big in relation to the size of the country. So you can see that here in this, there's a very big blue section on passenger transport expenditure on the inbound side, because this includes also people outside of Ireland booking trips with Ryanair anywhere. They don't have to go specifically to Ireland. They can go anywhere, and this will be counted on the balance of payment for Ireland. Similarly, if you look on the other side, you can see on the outbound, there's very little amount of very little blue area, because the passenger transport on the outbound side is relatively small from the balance of payment, and this is partly because this includes Irish residents booking flights with non-Irish airlines. So it excludes everything that Irish residents book using Ryanair, because that would be a transaction between two resident parties. So here's a summary of the differences in the cases, a bit more structured. This table is also coming from the IRTS, International Recommendations on Tourism Statistics, and you can go and see them when the links are shared. I'm not going to go through them because I think we've gone through the examples, and I hope that was clear enough. Thank you very much for your attention. I will stop now sharing my screen, and I would like now to move on to the presentations by countries on this item. We have 3, so this is very we have a lot of them to go through, and I think this is probably the most interesting part of the item. We will start with Grenada with Ms. Yvonne Dixon, who will present the point of view from Grenada, like I said. Ms. Dixon, the floor is all yours.
Okay, you all hear me clearly? Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Epstein. So as he said, my name is Yvonne Dixon. I work with the Grenada Tourism Authority, and our mandate is measuring and marketing the destination. So let me just look for my presentation to share my screen. Where is it? Just a minute. So I am not going to be very long today. Our case is very straightforward. So as I said, our little department measures tourism expenditure, right? Are you seeing my screen, Mr. Epstein?
I can see your screen, but I cannot see the presentation.
You can't see the presentation? Just now.
I see the Explorer, the file Explorer.
Let's see, just a minute, sir. Let's move this on. Stop sharing. Stop sharing. Just a minute. Open the presentation. Right. So I'm going to share screen. Right. Share screen. Presentation right here. Yes. You see it now? Okay. All right. You see that now? Okay. So like I was saying, we measure tourism expenditure on a monthly basis now. Previously, that would have been before in 2017, going back, we would have been doing it on a quarterly basis. But what we saw, because of seasonality issues, we would not have been getting the sample size that we would have needed in order to give an accurate picture of the spend of the average visitor coming to Grenada. So we went to CSO and CATA to get more assistance in how we could make our surveys better. So we moved in 2018. We perfected our methodology, I should say. Well, not really perfected, but just made it a little better, right? So we moved to monthly expenditure surveys. And our method was that we would put our interviewers in the departure lounge, and they had 7 days in which they get every flight that comes into that is leaving Grenada. So that would take us 7 days. We had 2 field interviewers in the departure lounge, and our sample size, and we stuck with it, we stuck to 300 persons. So even if it went under that 300, we would send them back again the following week in that same month to get that information. What we saw that was affecting our average daily expenditure calculations was our country market share. Now, when I say country market share, we have a population, our visitor population was the US, the UK, the Caribbean, Canada, and all others, Europe as well. And their market share, like the US, it was 44% of our visitor arrivals was from the US. But what we were seeing in our sample, more or less 55% or going up the road was US visitors. So what we had to do was make our sample representative of our visitor population. So we would have then decreased it or adjusted it in accordance when we were cleaning the data during the data entry process, which Samantha and I would actually be doing all that data entry, all that cleaning. So when we did that market share clean, then we would move on to the accommodation type. Now we have 6 types of accommodation in Grenada for our visitors. And what we saw is that hotels and private homes, they took up most of where our visitors stayed. So then we had to further clean the data to represent that statistic as well. And then we took into consideration our length of stay. And as I said, our seasonality issues. 1 month we would be booming, rocking with visitors. But then we have months where visitors, it's lower. You know, it's that time for work or school, so people wouldn't be coming as normal. So now we had to make that adjustment in our calculations for seasonality issues so that we can remove the biases from that database. So at the end of it, CSO was pleased with what we had to give them because now it really represented what our average daily spend was, which incidentally would have been like closer to $360 EC per day an average visitor would spend. Now, at the advent of COVID, we had to make some adjustments. We had to make some setbacks because while we were preparing for our March survey, the country went into lockdown. So that had to be canceled. So Samantha and I quickly had to make some adjustments in the spend that we would have to use to calculate for those that were already in the country and for those that, well, we would have missed. So we did a sort of estimation on the average spend for March using old historical data, but then going forward, we had no exit surveys. So now we had to make some assumptions. So what we did initially was compile a table where it had COVID-related expenses. And then we saw a report from UNWTO that gave guidelines and concepts in how to measure expenditure during COVID. So in using your concepts and in using Cartac's advice as well in what we had to do, we took into consideration the length of stay for the quarantine period. We took the PCR tests as well, the prices that they would have to pay. We looked at medical expenses because not everybody, well, visitors would not be able to stay at our hotels free of charge. They had to pay something. So then we got that expense as well. We had to look at transportation. Because of COVID, there was only a certain set of taxis that were allowed to operate. So then we had the routes and the cost it would take just for those taxi operators. And we had to take into consideration that shopping declined significantly. But what we saw, people were still buying spices, chocolates, rums, but they were getting it delivered to the hotel, or after quarantine, they would go to get that. So we actually looked at a comprehensive list and we brought it down and then separated it by what was quarantine related, what was COVID related, sorry, and what was regular expenses after quarantine, so that we would merge the two, but still have it separated to show, just in case, what was regular outside spend and what was COVID related and how the two of them look together, if you understand what I mean. I hope I'm not going too fast. What we did for accommodation rates though, because Ministry of Health is now in charge of accommodation where visitors coming into Grenada could stay. Everybody, even the private home visitor, had to make a stop at a hotel and pay at an accommodation and pay something for quarantine purposes, which would have ranged from 5 days, 7 days, and now 14 days. So we, in speaking with Carter, he gave us two methods to use: the monthly average method, weighted monthly average method, or the implicit weighted monthly average method. So I am leaning towards the implicit method because it takes into consideration the length of stay with the rates and with the weighted arrivals as well by the property. So this is what we have been doing during COVID to come up with a figure. We are also liaising with CSO. I know Karen is there, so she would be able to agree with me. We are looking at using the consumer price index as well, CPI, because what we notice is that at times when visitors come in, they want to live and behave like a local. So they spend like our local resident. So in the absence of having those surveys, we tend to use the CPI as a method to weight the data and move it along, whether decline or it increase or however we go. So that is where we are at and that is our country experience with expenditure. So if you all have any questions, I hope I can answer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dixon. I'm very happy to hear that you were able to use the guidance.
We did. We did instantly. As soon as we saw it, we were like, "Yay! Look, you had something out there for us." So we read it and we adjusted. Yeah.
Very happy you were able to use it, and indeed, it's I think a very interesting practice that you mentioned is being able to clearly specify what you're measuring, even if you're changing the way you're measuring, to be able to specify these things, because it's important when you interpret the data.
Yes, that was the question. We have a chairman that is pushing us now. He wants the data monthly, and we have to explain. So your report came in just in time.
Perfect.
All right.
Happy to hear that. And thanks a lot for the excellent presentation. Now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Marissa Scott, who will give us the point of view from Antigua and Barbuda. Ms. Scott, please, the floor is yours.
All right, warmest greetings to everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Let me share my screen quickly. I'd like to apologize in advance for any background noises. I think there's some construction taking place in the establishment downstairs. Totally beyond my control today. Okay, my name is Marissa Scott, and I am the statistician responsible for tourism statistics at the Antigua and Barbuda Statistics Division. And I'd like to take the opportunity to extend a heartfelt thank you to the CTO and the UNWTO for the invitation to participate. So just as an introduction, in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we derive our visitor expenditure estimates primarily from our visitor survey. Now, these estimates are produced on both an annual and a quarterly basis. Just to provide a bit more background, our visitor exit survey is entitled the Visitor Motivation, Expenditure and Satisfaction Survey, and it captures not only visitor expenditure patterns and visitor demographics, but visitor behavior and experience as well, as shown on the slide. Throughout the years, we have been receiving technical assistance from both the CTO and CARTAC in the execution of our survey, as well as the compilation of our visitor expenditure estimates. Now, onto our sample. Now, in the past, we have been using the convenience sampling method. However, we have noted that there have been overrepresentation of certain visitor characteristics, such as the accommodation class, as well as certain markets. Therefore, we decided to shift it to the stratified sampling method. Now, what we did in this case, we set a target for the year of 4,000, and then it was stratified in order to make it as representative of the visitor arrivals population as possible. So what will end up happening is that we'd stratify it further, where we would set a target for each month, and the target is set in keeping with the seasonality of the tourism industry. For example, what do I mean by that? A higher target would be set for January, which is in the high season, as opposed to September, which would fall within our low season. Now, these target amounts are stratified further by main market distribution and further stratified by accommodation class, namely luxury, mid-range, and budget. Now, in practice, we have found this particularly useful as we were receiving too many responses from either the luxury sector or the budget sector, and this tended to skew our results. All right. So during the pre-COVID era, the survey was self-administered by enumerators who would present potential respondents with a paper questionnaire with the expectation that they would fill it out and return it before departing. Now, this survey is administered within the departure area of our international airport, as this is the only port of entry. at a frequency of 1 week out of every month of the year. However, due to the pandemic, our survey has been discontinued and still is. Therefore, our visitor expenditure estimates have been done using the CPI data. A major consideration in this case would be the reweighting of the various line item expenditure, which will be shown on the next slide. To give an example, recreation and outdoor activities would be pretty much non-existent due to the pandemic. Therefore, this would hold a lower weight in comparison to pre-COVID estimates. And also COVID-related costs such as testing, the PCR tests and quarantine, etc., will also be considered as well. Also, to note, before the pandemic, we actually had plans of converting the paper questionnaire into an electronic format. However, we've also scrapped that plan in order for a safer solution. Therefore, presently, what we're doing here at the division, and let me also add that this survey is done in conjunction with the Ministry of Tourism as well. So it's actually a collaborative effort. So basically at present, plans are in place to host the converted questionnaire onto our website, where we will invite our visitors to fill out the questionnaire using their own electronic devices. It is expected to be launched in the second quarter of this year, and the survey is expected to be available year-round, which should offer greater data coverage. The reason for this conversion would be to increase visitor confidence. Due to the pandemic, persons are not 100% comfortable with persons coming up to them with paper questionnaires and so on. So we've provided a more safer, more secure option for visitors to provide their various responses. Okay, so for the purpose of this presentation and also in the interest of time, I will describe the visitor expenditure section of the survey only. Now, as you can see here from the slide, questions 9 and 10 focus on the prepaid packages that the visitor would have purchased before arriving at the destination. Question 11 and 12 would focus on what was spent within the destination during the trip. Now, visitors are asked to detail not only their total expenditure, as we see in question 11, but items for question 12, and this is asked of visitors for both prepaid and in-country expenditure. In the cases where the data is completely missing, for example, we may receive a questionnaire where the accommodation cost or the transportation cost may be missing. This information is filled using our admin data sources that will be linked to the data provided by the visitor. Okay, so to break it down a little further, we have the hotel rates collected based on the accommodation name provided, as well as how long the visitor would stay, would be able to provide an estimate of what this particular case would have spent on accommodation. Okay, so we will now move on to survey findings. Shown on the slide are the quarterly total air visitor expenditure estimates from the first quarter of 2018 to the third quarter of 2020. Now, looking at the graph, of course, we can observe the seasonal fluctuations here, as well as a massive reduction in visitor expenditure at the start of the pandemic, which everyone here relates to on some level. Along with these results, we noted an increase in the length of stay, which may be linked to the new COVID-19 protocol. Also, in the case of our 2020 estimates, the previous year's estimates were adjusted using the CPI data in order to derive our quarterly 2020 values. Now, once our survey starts, we will be able to revert to our previous method, which would involve us finding the average daily expenditure for each main market and grossing these results up using the visitor arrivals data. Also, we would be able to have a greater handle on the COVID expenses due to the specific COVID questions being added to our feature questionnaire. Also, just to note, we only produce visitor expenditure estimates by air for now. We do intend to expand our coverage to include collecting yachting expenditure, as we have a substantial yachting sector. However, these plans are in the pipeline for the future and are not expected to come on stream anytime soon. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott. It's a very, very interesting presentation. It's always nice to see how fast countries can react to new situations, in this case, COVID, and come up with a completely new strategy or a completely new tool to collect data. This is Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to the last country presentation for this item. I will pass the floor to Mr. Hefte Ojaeta from Belize, who will give the point of view from that country in terms of the estimation of tourism expenditure. Mr. We cannot hear you, I don't think. At least I can't, I don't know.
Hi, we're not hearing you, Hefteen. Can you check that your mic is connected to your device? You can type in the chat to communicate with us.
Test.
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So are you guys seeing my slide?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. Just as a background, a small background. Normally, tourism has been measured using physical flows. That is the number of visitors that come to the country. We also have demand variables, which is from the balance of payments, the travel credits, and other variables also available. And we also have supply variables that are used from the output of accommodation services. That is normally what we have been dealing with in Belize to estimate tourism. But as you know, that doesn't really account for all the expenditure of tourism, as we have been learning in this workshop. So in Belize, we decided that the best way to have a solution to this problem and to have an appropriate measure of tourism is to develop a tourism satellite account. Why? Because in tourism, unlike in conventional industries such as agriculture and manufacturing, cannot be measured directly as a one-to-one to an industry, right? Because it's across several industries that contribute towards the tourism product. So the tourism satellite account will take into account all the correlated supply and demand of related tourism goods and services that we can then estimate the actual production of tourism and the actual consumption of tourism. So for right now, the TSA would be the solution. But in order for us to do that solution, we would need to know how we would arrive there, right? And basically, as you guys have already presented, the total tourism expenditure would come from inbound tourism and outbound tourism and domestic tourism. Basically internal tourism and the national tourism. Currently in Belize, we only have a measure for the inbound tourism. All the purple, we didn't have a measure. So we didn't have a measure for the domestic tourism and the outbound tourism. And why it is important for us to have this information is because, as you know, we're located in Central America, and we are connected by land to two major countries, Mexico and Guatemala, and by sea to Honduras, Guatemala, and other countries close by, Florida and Texas. Right? So it's important to see the movement of the domestic movements of Belizeans going outside, and the internal movement of Belize, as Belize also has a rich package to offer to the Belizean society. So what we decided to do is that we need to explore the possibility of developing a survey to capture the expenditure of the domestic market. In this domestic tourism survey, we would be measuring the expenditure of outbound tourism and inbound tourism within the local economy, right? So that's a domestic tourism. I forgot to mention that the inbound tourism that we measure for international visitors, we do it on a monthly basis for the Belize Tourism Board and the Central Bank of Belize. We do the survey for 7 days, and they get the information to estimate the expenditure. Okay, so in 2019, Belize decided to do the domestic tourism survey alongside the Ministry of Tourism and Civil Aviation. This was designed to capture the needed indicators for the tourism fulfilling the missing components of the tourism expenditure. Sample size of about 3,000 households was randomly selected across the country, and because it was our first study of this kind, we decided to do a periodic sample by quarters. So we split our sample by 4, arriving about 700 households every quarter, to understand if there was any seasonality in the expenditure correlated to the types of travel. Mainly the way we did the survey, we had 2 components in our questionnaires. The household module, which just basically gave us the characteristics of the members of the household and the household, and the individual module, which would identify the persons that would be considered eligible to answer to the types of travel, the domestic travel, the overnight travel, and the international day and international overnight travel. And also they would provide us information on the expenditure component for each type of these travels, and the employment and the income. So basically that was what was developed. And just to give you overall response rates that we obtained from the survey, we had high response rates for the household component. Similarly, for the individual component, we had very good response rates, we can say. There were some limitations, however, as our target population was 18 years and over, which we defined as the spenders. This did not correlate with the working age population, which is 14 and plus. So some expenditure could have been misrepresented or missed in this regard, because well, it's legal in the country for children to start working 14 and plus. So if they earn money, they can spend their money however they want. Also, the individual non-response rates, if these were systematically different from the people who were interviewed, there might be some bias in the data, because we did not impute the individual non-responses, but rather what we did, we weighted them up, doing a weighting factor adjustment for the non-responses. So there might be some bias in there. And the other problem was because we did the survey on a quarterly basis. Harmonizing the data sets was a bit of a problem, because in the initial development design of the questionnaire for the Q1, we did not include the variable in the income in the questionnaire. So that produced some inconsistency between the data set. And that also brings to mind that what we didn't do was do imputation at the variable level for item non-response, right? Because normally we're accustomed to do only household non-response adjustments at the household level, at the overall response rate. But when it comes to the actual variables, we normally don't have that practice to do it, but from what we did in incorporating the income variable for the remaining of the quarters and not for the first quarter, we should have gone back and looked at the income variable and impute the income variable for all the 700 cases for quarter one. So that's some of the issues we have. Additionally, there's insufficient cases or responses per variable, right? So which doesn't allow to disaggregate at the district level, only at the national level. This has to do also, like what I mentioned, with not being able to do the imputations at the item level. All right, so just as an overall summary of what we have done, the weighted survey, we discovered that in 2019, Belizeans traveled a lot. So this is the number of trips taken by type in Belize, with domestic travel, domestic day travel accounting for the most, followed by domestic overnight, right? So 79,000 trips were recorded in domestic day and 54,000 in domestic night, overnight. Similarly, the international day travel was the second largest, I mean the third largest, sorry, with 38,000. So as you see, there's a correlation between domestic day and international day. These two types of travel seem to happen the most in the country of Belize. The reason being, as I mentioned, the proximity is close and we are surrounded by two countries. From these survey results, we also were able to estimate the mean expenditure by the trip type. The highest expenditure, the average expenditure recorded was for international overnight, and that should be obvious. It's about $868. The domestic day is reported about $147. We believe that this is a high number, so we would need to explore more about this. From this, taking the expenditure, the average expenditure by type of travel and the total number of trips, we were able to compute a proxy estimation of the expenditure by type of trip in Belize. We now are able to say that based on the survey, we're estimating about $11.7 million spent in domestic day travel and $16 million spent in overnight domestic travel and so forth, right? So this would give us the missing components for the expenditure value that we're missing to have the total tourism expenditure. Now, interestingly, in 2008, 2019, prior to the tourism survey, we were doing the household budget survey. And in the household budget survey, we had a module which was asking for foreign travel and local travel. And we have tabulated the results of the household budget survey against the domestic tourism survey to see some of the inconsistencies or similarities that could have been identified. As you see, the domestic expenditure is now computed here, which is the overnight, domestic overnight plus the domestic day travel expenditures. And the outbound expenditure is the international overnight and international day travel expenditures. And what we find interesting is that from the household budget survey, the local travel seems to be quite significantly lower than what is reported from what is estimated, from the domestic tourism survey. So we would need to explore a bit more what happened at the domestic tourism survey, or maybe our current estimation method is not giving us the correct value. So we have to explore this a little bit more, but I just want to put this out there that we're still exploring the information. Yes, we have published the results of the survey, but in the results of the survey, we are not reporting the expenditure value as a total. We're just giving an average of the expenditure value, which is the average per trip by the type of trip. That's the only thing that we have reported. That's basically the experience for Belize with regards to this. So thank you for your time. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ojeda. Thanks for the excellent presentation, very detailed on the experience of Belize. I have to say, I'm very impressed with the response rate that you got. It was quite impressive, very high, I thought. And also it's very interesting to see how important also domestic tourism can be. It seems like it's pretty much as important as outbound tourism in terms of expenditures. So this is an interesting conclusion as well. I think with this, we can close item 3. We're due for a break, but before the break, I think it would be good to, if we can put the poll for this item. We also have another question. These questions are mostly used to refresh a bit what we've learned during this item. So I'm going to ask, please, attendees, if you can respond. This will be open for 5 minutes, and we will also use these 5 minutes to take a break. So once you respond, you can relax for 5 minutes and then come back. We will be starting again at 11:37, if this is okay. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in 5 minutes. Hello, everyone again. We can now, I think, go back. Maybe we can now end the poll. I see we have about 68% of attendees who voted. So again, very good response, 69% now. Very good response rate. So we can maybe end the polling. And we'll, again, like I mentioned before, look at the results at the end of in item 6 of the program. One thing that I also forgot to mention that Sean commented on the chat box before we move on to the next item and we leave the world of tourism expenditure. He mentioned that CTO developed a harmonized expenditure survey questionnaire. The approach is to have some core questions that overlap and will be used for harmonization across the region. This will be combined with country-specific questions to allow for differences in countries' policies, priorities. And this questionnaire is also consistent with the international recommendations on tourism statistics and the TSA. So if you're interested in this, please contact our colleagues at CTO. So we can move on now maybe to the next item, understanding tourism industries and products. We will have a similar structure as before. We will have Leandri will go over some of the main concepts. We will go then over the key variables. And finally, we'll have a total of 2 country presentations. So let's get started with that. Leandri, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Hernan. Okay. You can see my screen, I believe, right? Yeah, thank you. So yes, we start the module on tourism industries and products. So, you know, I will do a very brief recap on theoretical aspects on this subject. At the end of the module, we will be able to understand tourism from a supply perspective, to list the main tourism industries, to list the main tourism products as well, to identify the main data sources and the main variables. So what makes tourism special is that while traditional industries such as agriculture or manufacturing are classified according to what they produce and how they produce it, tourism is defined by the demand for products, either goods and services, by a special type of consumer, the visitor. So it's defined by who consume the products. It is a demand-side phenomenon, as you know, and refers to the activities of visitors and their role in the acquisition of goods and services. But at the same time, tourism can also be viewed from the supply side and be understood as a set of productive activities that cater mainly for visitors. So in the national account, tourism is not defined as a single industry, but as a cluster of different industries. To be considered a tourism industry, an industry needs to produce goods and services mainly consumed by the visitors. So tourism supply is understood as a direct provision to visitors on the goods and services that make up tourism expenditure. So what are the tourism products? According to the IRTS, the tourism characteristic products, as referred by in the IRTS, are those that satisfy one or both of the following criteria. 1, a tourism expenditure on the product should represent a significant share of the total of tourism expenditure. And B, tourism expenditure on the product should represent a significant share of the supply of the product in the economy. That means that the supply of tourism characteristic product will cease to exist in meaningful quantity in the absence of visitors. So tourism characteristic activities are the activities that typically produce tourism characteristic products, and they are best known as tourism industries. So what are the different categories of these tourism characteristic products? This classification is in line with the international, with central product classification. So we have accommodation services for visitor, for example, products such as hotel rooms or camping sites, food and beverage serving activities, like meals in restaurant, for example, railway, roads, and water passenger transport services. In the Caribbean, very relevant here, the ferry cruises and sightseeing. Transport equipment rental services, either renting a boat or a car, will be included. Travel agencies and other reservation services, or air tickets, package tours, etc. Cultural services, for example, a visit to a museum, to a concert, to a theater will enter there. Sports and recreational activity. This would include, for example, diving or going to a casino. So these 10 first are set for international comparability, but they are also the two last, they are set according to each country characteristic that can be, for example, liquors or jewelry or special handicrafts. Regarding, So what are the tourism industry? Here we can see the classification. Here again, the 10 first are for international comparability purposes, and they are in line with the International Standard Industrial Classification of All Economic Activities, the ISIC, revision 4. So we see the different categories: accommodation for visitors, that would include short-term accommodation activities, camping ground, recreation vehicle, hikers, parks, etc. Food and beverage serving activity, restaurants and mobile food service activities, beverage serving activities, railway, road and water passenger transport, air passenger transport, transport equipment rental, travel agencies and other reservation service activities, cultural activities, sports and recreational activities, and then the specific to the countries. That can be on souvenirs, on handicrafts, on duty-free shop. So I think I've done my best to do a bit rapidly because we are a bit late, but I would like to finish with possible surveys from the supply side of tourism. So of course, the main one can be the business surveys, or business surveys typically focused on tourism activities, administrative data, the business registers and some tax records, and if possible in the national accounts, the supply and use table. So I stop here for this very brief overview, and I will be happy to respond to any of your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leandri, for the great presentation. Now we'll move on to the second point within this item. I'll make a brief presentation on the key variables. So from these definitions, we can also go into the main variables and indicators that can be produced. I'm going to focus, as we've done in the past, on what is collected by the UNWTO. I'll share my presentation first. Okay. So my outline is going to be pretty much the type of information we collect normally from countries on this item, on tourism industries. Of course, there are many more indicators that could be computed and could be very useful to countries. I'll first focus on the number of establishments, and I'll show you a bit of also on the availability of data at the global level and the Caribbean level. I think this is one of the most important things that we can share, how much data we have and is available on these indicators. So in terms of the number of establishments in tourism industries, countries report to UNWTO the number of establishments total in tourism industries, and they can also be disaggregated by accommodation. Within the accommodation, how many in hotels and similar establishments, how many also establishments related to food and beverage, passenger transportation, travel agencies, and then other tourism industries. So that's how it's disaggregated within the UNWTO questionnaire. Here you can see the response rate that we get at the global level within the Caribbean. From the global level, we have a little less than half of countries who report the total, but we have 182 out of 222 countries that report a disaggregation of the number of establishments. So they can provide how many were related to accommodation for visitors, or how many to hotels, or how many to food and beverage, and so on. So we had 182 of 222 countries that report this at the global level. So the coverage is quite good. In the Caribbean, we have 18 out of the 29 countries. So this also is a pretty good coverage that we have for this indicator. Now, if we look at the amount of items in which the data is disaggregated, so if they provide only one category, or they provide two categories, for example, accommodation and food, or all 6 categories, this is the way it looks for Caribbean countries. We have 11 of the 29 countries that, as I said, don't report a disaggregation. Out of the rest, the 18 that do report, 11 report only one category, 6 report 2 categories, and there's only one country that reports all 6 categories, the whole disaggregation. If we compare the response rates between at the global level and within the Caribbean, we can see that the response rate in the Caribbean is a bit worse off than at the global level. This doesn't mean necessarily that this data is not created in Caribbean countries, but it means that it's not reported to the UNWTO. If we move now to accommodation data, to monetary data on the accommodation for visitor hotels and similar establishments on this specific industry, this is mostly data from SNA, from the System of National Accounts. As you can see, the coverage that we get for the world is not that great. We get about 1/4 of countries reporting these data. The most reported indicators is the gross value added in this industry. If you look at the Caribbean, we don't get almost any data. We only get the Dominican Republic reporting data on GVA, on gross value added. If we move on now to non-monetary data from accommodation establishments, also from this industry of accommodation. And these indicators are mostly the number of establishments, the number of rooms, the number of bed places. Here we can see that we have also, again, very good coverage. This map shows where we have data at least for 1 year since 1995. The darkest, the color, it means the more recent the data. As you can see, almost the whole world is covered, so we have almost data for all countries. If you look at the data we have in the Caribbean, this is the picture that we get in terms of establishments. As you can see, we have data for a good number of countries in the Caribbean. As we look at rooms, I thought it was also interesting to see how, when we look at establishments, the values tend to be quite a bit smaller than when we compare them, for example, to Central America. But if we move on up to rooms and to beds, when you look at Caribbean countries, they are quite comparable to Central America, for example, which means that the hotels and establishments are normally bigger than the ones found in Central America, for example. And finally, we look at the additional indicators, the data that we have on these 4 indicators: occupancy rate in terms of rooms and bed places, and average length of stay, and available capacity. We will look at available capacity later on. But we have also a decent geographical coverage at the global level and also at the Caribbean level. They're comparable for the first three indicators: occupancy rate at the rooms, at the bed level, and average length of stay. If you look at the data, it's also interesting to see that the average occupancy rate in Caribbean countries is higher, both on rooms and bed level, when compared to the rest of the world. And also the average length of stay in the Caribbean countries is, when we take the average over all the countries that we have data for, is closer to 7, when in the rest of the world is below 5. If you look at, for example, the average length of stay, this is the data that we have. For example, we can see how in the OECS countries, there are similar lengths of stays between 8 and 10 nights on average. And when we look at, for example, a country like Puerto Rico, it's lower, about 2 to 3 nights. Jamaica, for example, is between 6 and 7 nights. And finally, when we look at bed places per 1,000 inhabitants, this is the last indicator that I was talking about. We can see that some of the highest values are in the Caribbean at the global level. If you look closer, we can see, for example, that the biggest values can be found in the Cayman Islands, about 312 bed places per 1,000 inhabitants. But like, as I mentioned before, in the Caribbean, values tend to be bigger than the rest of the world, and comparable to other island states, such as those in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean, as you can see here. Well, thank you very much for your attention. This is, I think, a way of seeing a more practical example of what of the concepts that Leandri defined before in her presentation. I think now we can move on to the country experiences. We will start first with, again, Ms. Dixon from Grenada, giving her overview of the measurement of tourism industries in Grenada. Ms. Dixon, the floor is all yours.
Hello again. Are you seeing my screen? Mr. Epstein, you seeing it? Sam, you seeing the screen?
Yes, we can see it. I don't know if it's possible to put it on slideshow.
Yes, I'm going to put it on slideshow now. Okay. So
Perfect.
Our country experience, right, understanding tourism industries and products. So we would, we have a dedicated department, actually, quality assurance, who would do regular visits. They will keep track of our accommodation stock. They break it down by properties, rooms, beds. As you see on the screen, I have just a short table, almost a snapshot of what we would usually give to CTO. And I believe that when we are doing our UNWTO reports as well, we will include some of that information. Our department would compile occupancy rates, we would do occupancy rates on a monthly basis. Which means that we need to have, because the accommodation sector is so, they are private, they don't like their information out and about too much. So we would liaise with our GHTA, which is the Hotel and Tourism Association, and we would also liaise directly with our accommodation stakeholders as well, so that we could get this information. We are currently compiling average daily rates as well, which would assist us in our expenditure, like I said, and other things, investment reports. Investors will come and they'll want to know, so what are your occupancy rates? What's the average daily rates that you all have? What's peak season? So all these things we try to get in measuring our accommodation sector. So that's basically what we do for accommodation. Another main sector for us is the dive. The dive industry is really an up and coming niche for us, very important. So we would keep track of that, of their statistics as well. We did a survey in 2019, which gave us information on the spending patterns, the type of dive visitor that we would get, where they stay in, their country of residence. You know, we really drilled down in that survey. We have a sort of working relationship that we're trying to build with the dive sector. They also are very wary in giving information out just like that. And if it's not from Central Statistical Office or it's not VAT office, we tend to have to go around and really beg, but still and all, we're getting something. So this is just a snapshot as well of our information on a monthly basis from 2017 to 2019 to 2020, sorry, on our dive stats. And then yachting. So yachting statistics is actually one of my favorite. We would have done a survey, a pilot survey with the OECS when they were doing a new software. Kevin mentioned it in his presentation earlier today. So we did that survey, and it was really interesting. And the yachting sector is so engaging. They like to answer questions. They will tell you what they want, what they like about the country. You know, they envelop you actually, and they make you part of the whole procedure. So I was all into yacht survey and yacht stats at that time. So we have really a great relationship with the association, MIAG. We have a nautical development manager dedicated to these things as well. So we are really on the ball with measuring yachting statistics. We know we have a table where we have where they come from, how many people on the boat, the spending pattern, which from the survey showed it was approximately $1,300 US per boat. And we also have maybe what types of boat they come in with, what type of yacht they have, what they like, what they don't like. So we actually do a lot of work with the yachting sector, and we plan on going forward to do another survey, which if not this year, later on when, as Kevin said, when the season picks up again. So these are our main tourism industries that we measure right now. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Dixon again.
You're welcome.
Very, very interesting presentation as usual. Sorry, and I think this is also brings up an issue that came up yesterday and today as well, on building the relationships with data providers and how important this can be. We'll move on now to the final presentation on this item. I would like to ask Mr. Jose Hernandez from Aruba to present the Aruba perspective on this issue. Mr. Hernandez, the floor is all yours.
Hi, good morning. Bon dia, as we say here in Aruba. I will now share my presentation. Share. Okay. So just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Jose Hernandez. I was just recently appointed as of last month as the head of tourism department at the Central Bureau of Statistics. So first of all, I want to thank you all for this invitation for the workshop. Very a learning experience now that I am in the beginning of the learning process of this area. So in the next couple of minutes, I will elaborate briefly about the data sources that we have that we use in the tourism department. And I may not go very into details because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in and the learning process. So we have data sources that we use here are administrative data and surveys. Administrative data are less expensive and less time consuming, but they don't give you the information, the total information that you need actually. So therefore we use surveys also. Administrative data that we collect here are, for example, the ED card, that the data supplier for this information is the Aruba Tourism Authority. And this information is used to create a universe for the inbound tourism by air and also determine the sampling framework for the tourism expenditure survey. Also, we use the cruise ship list, which is cruise manifest, and it gives information about the passengers that come to Aruba. And also it's used for the universe and the frame for the sample framework. And the immigration passport database is for the outbound tourism. It's used for the outbound tourism. Also, we have the hotel register, or we collect information about the hotels and timeshares every month. How we do that is we send an email to the hotels and timeshares, and they will, in their place, they will give information about occupancy and revenues. And we have this information per month, and this data is published then in the hotel reports with indicators such as the occupancy rate, average daily rate, and the room nights, and revenue per available room. Also, we use the business register, which is from the National Accounts Department. There was an economic census that was held for the tourism department in 2014. And the business register actually uses data from the Social Security Bank and the tax department. And we combine that information together, and that is used for employment in the tourism. The business register uses the ISIC revision 4, and we adapted the ISIC revision 4 for Aruba a bit. We named it the Aruba ISIC, which comprises different sorts of ISICs together, because we're a small economy, and a lot of those ISICs we don't have an economic substance and a lot of ISICs. And also we have the supply use table that the national accounts compiles. The way they compile is that they get information from the tax department about the cost structure of both companies, and that is used further for the supply use table and also by product and ISIC. Okay. Advantages of administrative sources is that they're cheaper and also less time consuming, and you have the whole population. But you have disadvantages, and sometimes a problem of a bottleneck is when you have contact persons that changes. For example, you have a certain contact person and it goes, and you have to build another relationship with another person to get the same information that you are used to getting. Besides the administrative sources, we also have the surveys. We have the tourism expenditure survey, and the cruise survey, and the tourism outbound survey. I will go a little bit global in every survey. So the tourism expenditure survey is conducted on a monthly basis in Aruba since 1996, as tourism became an important economic source on the island, and for the availability of data in order to improve the product for policymakers and have more detailed information about the visitors. The tourism expenditure survey was introduced to get more information about about the visitors. For example, where do they come from, how much they spend on products and services, and where do they visit, and also the level of satisfaction. The tourism expenditure survey takes place every third Saturday of the month and has a duration of 1 week. This survey takes place at the departure hall of the airport, and tourists are very they cooperate very good with this information, with this survey, sorry. So if this survey takes place face-to-face, we have 3 interviewers that take these questionnaires. In the beginning, these questionnaires would fill on paper. Then we switched in 2009 to a digital form. Then we used the program, the software that was CS Pro. And then we switched to another program, which is now the Survey to Go program, which it is a pay-as-you-go program. But the benefits are that the data is readily available. As the survey is completed, you have the survey in-house. Okay. For the sampling, we have a fixed amount of surveys per month. It was 375 surveys per month. Then it was adjusted, increased to 500 surveys per month. It is stratified based on the main markets and distributed about, so the quota is based on the stratified of the markets. The final product that we get is the report. This data is then published in the report, which is the tourist profile. In the publication, you will find characteristics about the visitors and behavior, satisfaction, and expenditure from the visitors and are described. Then we have the cruise survey. The cruise survey is also, since 2018, it's done monthly in Aruba at the cruise terminal. Before 2018, it was carried out every 3 to 5 years, depending on the relevancy. And this measures the inbound tourism by sea. Okay. Okay. Okay, this takes the cruise survey, provides information about the expenditure of same-day visitors. This survey takes place between the 1st and the 3 weeks of every month. And it is also a face-to-face survey, which captures information about departing cruise visitors, and it takes place at the cruise terminal. The sample varies month by month, and it is stratified based on the cruise ships. And the cruise ships are stratified by size, origin, and type. We have 5 categories, and also based on those certifications, then the sample is determined per certification. And then we have also the tourism outbound survey that is also held since October 2018 monthly. And it collects information about the expenditure of Aruba residents returning from their trip. This surveys take place the 2nd Saturday of every month, and it takes a duration of 1 week. This is also a face-to-face survey, which we have also 3 interviewers that compile the information, that get the survey, that fills the surveys. And we have a fixed amount of 350 questionnaires that the interviewers have to complete, and it's also stratified based on the arrival port of the residents. Okay, final remarks. During the last couple of years, the tourism statistic was assisted by a UNWTO consultant who revised the existing system of tourism statistics and made some recommendations to improve the tourism statistics. This was done with the intention to produce a tourism satellite account for Aruba. In the first half of this year, the report should be published with the findings of the tourism satellite account for Aruba. Also, we have currently, as everyone is going through, we have challenges due to COVID-19. Since March 2020, we weren't able to collect any information for any survey, because first there was a lockdown, and then there are rules and regulations that are placed by the government that you have to take in place, that Actually, you cannot do face-to-face interviews for now. So that is a challenge that we have. As you mentioned earlier, you have a compilation guide for the COVID. It's very interesting to look at and to see if there's information can help to going forward with this. That was the presentation for now. Just thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I will hear it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hernandez, for this excellent overview of the main sources that you have on tourism in Aruba, which are very extensive, as you can see, and it's impressive how you can collect data, on a monthly basis on expenditure, such as other countries have also shared their experience on that. I think we have maybe, I saw there was 1 or 2 questions on this presentation, but we will go back to this later on item 6, if that's okay. In the meantime, we will close this item with another final question, another poll. So if we can please open the poll for item 4. Again, another way of refreshing what we've learned and see if the concepts actually stuck in with the attendees, please. I encourage you to respond at your own time. We're going to leave it up for about 3 minutes, and then we will close and move on to the last item, or the second last item on measuring employment in the tourism industries. In case you haven't responded yet to the quiz, we'll leave it up for about 1 minute, 1 more minute, and then we'll resume. Thank you. Okay, we've reached almost a 60% response rate. So we'll close the polling and we'll look at the results again on item 6 on questions and answers. We will now move on to item 6 and item 5 on measuring employment in the tourism industries. The structure will be similar to the previous item, so I will first give the floor to Landry so she can present the main concepts and definitions. Landry, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Hernan. Yes, so we are nearly finishing the program today. At the end of this last module on measuring employment, we at the end will be able, I hope, to differentiate between tourism employment and employment in the tourism industries, to distinguish between jobs and persons employed, to understand the key variables of employment used in tourism, and to identify the main data sources. So there are two main conceptual measures of employment in tourism: tourism employment and employment in the tourism industries. Tourism employment refers to all jobs that are strictly related to the goods and services acquired by visitors and produced by either tourism industries or other industries. But the difficulty here is that labor is a factor of production and as such related to a production process, not to a product, and even less so to the consumption of a product by a certain category of consumers, the visitor in our case, and can be associated with the total output of an establishment, but can't be assigned to any particular output without the use of specific assumptions and modeling procedures. So the tourism employment cannot be directly observed. Therefore, the international recommendations for tourism statistics recommends to use the employment in the tourism industries because it can be directly observed. Employment in the tourism industries refers to all jobs in the tourism industries, even those not related to tourism characteristic services. For example, a restaurant that also offers catering services to residents. So here we can see the basic categories of employed persons in the tourism industries. They are classified by in paid employment and in self-employment. So employees can be either at work or with a job, but not at work. What means at work is quite straightforward, but maybe in times of pandemic, it's worth mentioning that at work also include, for example, persons teleworking or persons working reduced hours and persons performing a reduced task related to their job. And not at work would include, for example, on sick leave or paternity or maternity leaves. So here we can see that employees also include casual workers, workers in short-time employment, in seasonal employment, and out workers. Self-employed can be also at work or with an enterprise but not at work. And they refers to employers, own account workers, members of producers cooperatives, contributing family members, and also casual workers, workers in short-time employment, workers in seasonal employment, and out workers. So here we can see in the figure the main measures for employment in the tourism industries. So employment in the tourism industries may be measured as a count of the person employed in the tourism industries in any of their jobs, as a count of the persons employed into tourism industries in their main jobs, or as a count of the jobs in tourism industry. So I guess, yeah, you can see here in the figure at the top of the figure the difference. But let's see more precisely the difference. So an establishment needs people to work at various posts, and these posts can be either vacant or filled, and this is a demand side of labor. And here the statistical unit is a job. So a job is a set of tasks and duties performed or meant to be performed by a person. But of course, the intensity of work may vary from job to job and to industry and industries and from period to period. So jobs may differ by working time of persons employed and therefore be expressed in terms of full-time or part-time employment. So it's not sufficient to have data on the number of jobs or person employed in order to obtain information on the volume of labor. What will give us the exact size or volume of labor is the full-time equivalent employment, which we can see at the bottom of the figure. And this will correspond to the total hours actually worked by all employed person divided by the average number of hours actually worked in full-time jobs. But we are going to see an illustrative example to clarify this. Oh, I don't have it, sorry. Oh, I thought I was here, but maybe, well, don't worry, I have my, not my updated PowerPoint. So you might think there are a lot of measures and which one to choose. So each measure serves different purposes. Countries may adopt one or more of them, depending on the intended use or depending on their unique circumstances in terms of sources of data available. If the intent is to determine the number of people who depend to some extent for their livelihoods for working in the tourism industry, then a count of persons with a job, main or other, in these industries will be appropriate, while the measure based on employment in the main job will serve to gauge those with significant attachment or dependence to the tourism industries, for instance. If the intent is to make a comparison between tourism and non-tourism industries, or between the tourism industries and the economy overall, then a count of jobs in the tourism industry will be more appropriate. So here you can see some data sources that could help to build the statistics on employment in the tourism industries. Of course, the most important one is a household labor survey, which is the main instrument of data collection on employment for both employees and self-employed. From the supply side, the most relevant survey will be the surveys on economic activities. Then it will be also relevant to see administrative data, either employment office registers, social security files, labor inspection records, or even tax records. You can also use data from censuses, either establishment census or population census. And finally, the national accounts, the employment and full-time equivalent data. Depending, of course, on the situation of each country, there might be also other sources. I would like to finish this very brief overview by showing you two publications that UNWTO has done in collaboration with the International Labour Organization. And I really encourage you to have a look at them if you want to deepen your knowledge on the measurement of employment in the tourism industries. They are available in the UNWTO webpage, but I guess we will also send it to you right after this workshop. Thank you very much, and happy to hear any of your questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Landry, for the great presentation, defining all the different types of measures that we have in employment. I will now do, just like before, a brief presentation on different variables and indicators that we collect at UNWTO in relation to employment. So again, my outline will again be the variables that we collect from UNWTO in our questionnaire every year, and we will go over the coverage that we have both at the global level for each of these indicators and in the Caribbean. So let's start with the number of employees by tourism industries. This is the first of the concepts that Leandri just defined. We ask countries to report this at the total level, but also disaggregated by the different tourism industries. We have the same disaggregation that we had before for the number of establishments. You can see that about almost half of countries in the world report the disaggregation on number of employees by tourism industries. About 102 out of 222 countries. And if we look at specifically in the Caribbean, we have 6 countries that reported out of the 29 that we're counting. When we look at how disaggregated data is provided for these 6 countries in the Caribbean, we can see that 2 of these 6 countries provide data on just one of the 6 categories. And then one country provides data on 2 of the categories. Another country provides data with 4 of the categories. So for example, accommodation, other accommodation, food, and passenger transport. There's one country that provides data disaggregated in 5 of these categories. And there's also one country that provides data for all of these categories. We again compare it to the response rate we get normally with the rest of the world, and we can see again that in the Caribbean we get a bit less data than we do from the rest of the world in terms of response rates. These are some examples of the data we get. The one at the top is for Belize. Here we get data. So in the last few years, we've gotten data disaggregated by accommodation, by food and beverage services, passenger transport, travel agencies, and other tourism industries. As you can see, there's also an increasing trend in the country in the last 10 years or so. For Martinique, we also get data disaggregated by all 6 categories. As you can see, there's also some sort of increasing trend. In the United States Virgin Islands, we receive data where we have accommodation, data disaggregated by accommodation, food and beverages, employees, passenger transportation, and other tourism industries. Similarly, in the Dominican Republic, we get data disaggregated by accommodation and other tourism industries. These were, I think, the 6 countries, or some of these countries, 4 of the 6 countries that we collect data from, that we receive data from. Now we move on to the second type of indicator or measure that Leandri defined, the number of jobs. We also collect data on this. Now the response rate is a lot worse for this type of measure at the global level and in the Caribbean as well, following the same trend. As you can see, we get about 44 countries reporting data at the global level. That's less than a quarter of all countries. We get about 2 countries in the Caribbean. These are Belize and Martinique. Again, if we compare the geographical coverage between the world and the Caribbean, we can see again that the Caribbean is underrepresented. We have a worse response rate in Caribbean countries. And finally, the last indicator that we collect is on the measure of full-time equivalent jobs. We collect disaggregated by status, so employees or self-employed, and by gender, by male or female jobs. Again, here we get not a great coverage at the global level. We got about 37 countries out of the 222 responded and providing data on these on this indicator. This is again less than 1/5, less than 20% of all countries. And from the Caribbean, we get 2 countries. We receive data from 2 countries on this measurement, Grenada and Martinique. And again, same as before, if we compare the coverage between the global level and the Caribbean countries, we have a bit of a worse coverage in data from the Caribbean. That is all from my side. I think this gives a bit of an overview of the type of variables that can be computed in terms of employment measurement and the coverage of these measurements around the world. I think now we had planned a presentation by Mr. Donny Dorset from the US Virgin Islands, but I'm not sure, I cannot see him on the panelist, so I'm not sure if he's connected. I don't know, Sharon, if you see him.
No. Good day, Mr. Epstein. This is Ms. Liebert. I will be giving the presentation. Dorset was not able. I apologize. I just got last minute notice, so I'm going to try my best to do him justice, and I will be giving the presentation if that is okay.
Perfect, excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm very happy that we can have the experience of the US Virgin Islands. This is it's always, I think, the most important part of the items is and the most interesting is when countries can share their experiences and best practices. So I think this is Miss Liebert, right?
Yes, Miss Liebert.
Miss Liebert, perfect.
Yes.
So I'll give you the floor now, Miss Liebert, and happy to hear you. Thank you. The floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Sure. Can you see my screen? Okay. Good day, my name is Bernicia Liebert. I am with the Bureau of Economic Research. I am a research assistant, and I will be giving this presentation today on measuring employment in the Caribbean tourism industries, US Virgin Islands. We'll be touching on gross domestic product, the territorial product, tourism arrivals, employment, and the COVID-19 pandemic business survey. Historically, tourism and export of refined petroleum products contributed largely to the territory's GDP. In 2012, the territorial GDP fell an estimated 15% due to the closure of Hovensa refinery operations in February of 2012. The increase of 1.2% in calendar year 2016 was due to tourism and the Lime Tree Bay terminal storage of oil. A 6% decline in 2017 was due to the impact of hurricanes Irma and Maria. The recent increase in 2018 of 1.7% is due to an uptick in federal funding related to disaster recovery. In the absence of the selected 2019 GDP data, the Bureau is estimating 1.7% growth in 2019 due to the continued federal disaster-related funding and the 14.2% drop in calendar year 2020 due to the loss of tourism arrivals. The recent announcement of Lime Tree Bay Refinery to commence the production of refined petroleum products would greatly benefit the territory's GDP estimates. Most of the information in this presentation will be presented by fiscal year, but however, in some cases, we will be presented it by calendar year. The US Virgin Islands tourism arrivals. Total visitors peaked at 2.7 million in fiscal year 2014. Total visitor arrivals for fiscal year 2020 declined by 33.4%. In fiscal year 2016, air arrivals peaked to 794,935. The increase in air arrivals is partly due to the Department of Tourism and its partners providing a traveler promotions and additional flights during the 2015-2016 winter season. The COVID-19 pandemic affected air arrivals to the territory. The St. Thomas St. John air arrivals for fiscal year 2020 was 343,517 and declined by 27% in comparison to the 470,519 in fiscal year 2019. The island of St. Croix experienced a 40.3% decrease from 167,357 to 99,892. Overall, total air arrivals weighing down by 30.5% from 637,876 to 443,409. For fiscal year 2021, total air arrivals are down an estimated 15.1% from the 148,148 to 125,707. For the island of St. Croix, air arrivals decreased by 25.1% and from the 34,877 to the 26,115. The St. Thomas St. John district fell by 12%. For cruise arrivals, I'm sorry. The fiscal year 2014 cruise passengers for territory peaked at 2,054,625. The lower cruise arrivals in fiscal year 2018 were partly due to the effects of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. In fiscal year 2019, overall cruise arrivals rose by 24.7%. In fiscal year 2020, we welcomed 898,820 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This represents a 38.7% decline. The projected direct economic loss to cruise passenger arrivals for the first quarter of fiscal year 2021 is $118,174,314. This is major carrier direct flights for years 2019 to 2020. The second quarter of the calendar year of 2020 fell to 45.3%, averaging 7,320 from the 13,380 reported during the same period in 2019. The last quarter of 2020 saw an increase of direct seats to the territory, averaging 1% over the last quarter of 2019. The uptake of direct seats was due to the Department of Tourism marketing initiatives and the additional and seasonal flights returning to the territory. This is January. I apologize. I live in the islands. I apologize. I cannot control the chickens. I'm sorry. January to April 2019 and January to April 2021 a forecast. Okay. The major carrier flights are projected to remain in the first quarter of 2021 at 7.8% in comparison to the first quarter 2020. April forecasts of average direct seats are to be 22,254 compared to the 7,865 in 2020. Guest registrations for fiscal years 2014 to 2020. The USVI guest registration total fiscal year 2020 to 352,417. Primarily 72,380 guest registrations for the first quarter of fiscal year 2021. The COVID impact, the USVI tourism arrivals and expenditures. Prior to COVID-19, the USVI would have reasonably received an average of 958,213 cruise passenger arrivals for the first 6 months of calendar year 2021. The projected direct economic loss to cruise passenger arrivals for the first 6 months of calendar year 2021 is $240,511,463,000. For the first quarter of fiscal year 2021, hotel room revenues are down approximately 65%. 0.1%. Airbnb room tax collections for the first quarter of fiscal year 2021 rose to 65.2%. And a lot of that is due to a lot of construction is still being done post Irma Maria, and a lot of different businesses from away in terms of rebuilding the street lights and so forth are coming here, and a lot of them bring their families here, so they use Airbnb because it's more convenient, of course, than a hotel and so forth. So that explains the rise in the Airbnb area. 2019 tourism expenditures are at $1 billion. US Virgin Islands employment. Local non-agricultural industries employment peaked at 38,129 in fiscal year 2017. During this time, economic indicators for the territory had improved prior to Hurricanes Irma and Maria. The drop in non-agricultural employment to 13.1% in fiscal year 2018 is due to the loss of employment in leisure and hospitality, retail sector, and other services due to the 2017 hurricanes. The employment rose to 6.3% in fiscal year 2020 compared to the fiscal year 2019. The first quarter of fiscal year 2021, employment was at 1.1%, a reported 35,985 in comparison to 36,396 in the first quarter of fiscal year 2020. Government consisting of both local and federal public sector jobs is at 37%. A drop in the public sector percentage rate is expected in the second quarter of fiscal year 2021 due to the closure of activities related to the USVI Census 2020. Leisure and hospitality fell to 16% due to the loss of larger accommodation establishments due to Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Construction has risen over the last 3 years to 9%, primarily due to the disaster recovery related construction. This sector normally averages at about 4%. The effects of COVID on our tourism industry. Cumulatively, a total of 36,766 non-agricultural jobs in the territory for the 10 months of fiscal year 2020 compared to 34,345 in fiscal year 2019, an increase of 7.1%. During this period, During this period, unemployment rate rose to 7.9% in comparison to the recorded 6.4% in previous fiscal year. The average 41,389 persons were employed in civilian jobs during the 10-month period of fiscal year 2020. 18,751 on St. Croix and 24,800 in St. Thomas and St. John district. This is a 2% increase from the 43,379 persons employed for the corresponding period in fiscal year 2019. The territory jobless rate July 2020 fiscal year to date was 7.9% compared to the 6.4% reported in fiscal year 2019. The rate for St. Croix was at 6.9% the rate for St. Croix was at 6.9% from 5.8% 1 year earlier. The rate for St. Thomas and St. John district was 8.6% compared to the 6.9% 1 year ago. This slide shows the USVI civilian unemployment rate for fiscal year 2014 and 2020. Unemployment rate has begun an uptick in both districts, partly due to the several businesses' financial hardships due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The St. Croix unemployment rate in fiscal year 2020 is 7.4%. St. Thomas St. John unemployment rate is 8.1%. Overall unemployment rate is at 8.4%. Please note that the U.S. mainland, state governments, and international jurisdictions are facing similar socioeconomic hardships. First quarter fiscal year 2020, average unemployment rate are as follows. St. Thomas St. John district at 10%, the St. Croix district is at 7.9%, and the territorial rate is 9%. The U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Labor and how they assist the tourism industry during these hardships. The U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Labor has issued approximately 35,595 in unemployment insurance checks, a value of $27,255,795. I'm sorry. The Department of Labor issued 6,696 federal pandemic unemployment compensation checks, totaling $40,644,420. The Department of Labor issued 2,230,191 in pandemic unemployment assistance to self-employed Virgin Islanders and a $66,673 in pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. In total, the Department of Labor has issued 63,453 checks, totaling $70,912,000. Okay. Okay. The food and service sector has experienced a 28.2% decrease in the third quarter. The accommodation sectors in the territory experienced a decrease in the third quarter by 9.4%. For fiscal year to date, July 2020, restaurants and other food services showed a 20.5% job decrease from 6,852 to 5,450. The arts, entertainment, recreation sector employment also declined by 10.4%. This is a snapshot of the tourism-related employment from 2015 to 2018 in the territory. Just for visuals. This next slide is about our COVID business survey online. So because many businesses have been experiencing some hardships due to the COVID pandemic, and a lot of people have been losing jobs and so forth, the Bureau of Economic Research, in conjunction with the Office of Management and Budget, has selected an online survey in January 2021 for purposes of gathering information on effects of the pandemic on the territory's business. Questions that will be asked, data that's being gathered is based upon which businesses are most impacted. Most impacted are travel and transportation industries, hotels, restaurants, retail, and tourist attractions. How is the pandemic impacting business operations? About 51% of businesses were strongly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. 33% saw a moderate effect, 14% were slightly affected, and 2% were not affected. Temporary shutdown, increased administrative bottlenecks, and clients not paying bills significantly impacted these businesses. Another area of concern is our businesses at risk for closing permanently over the coming months. A few businesses were concerned about having to close permanently, as 72% said business closure was not imminent. However, 8% of small businesses may be at risk for closing permanently in 3 to 5 months, and 18% are at risk of closure in the next 6 to 12 months. And also, what strategies are businesses taking to cope in the face of this pandemic? So the territory reduction in employment, telework, employee layoffs, and applying for PPP funding and EIDL loans were the top coping strategies. And that basically sums up my presentation. And I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liber, for the great presentation and painting the picture of the situation in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Also, it was very refreshing and nice to hear your assistant there, the rooster. We will include him in the participant list, actually. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now, sorry. Now we will move on we start closing the workshop. We will move on to the question and answers item. There were a few questions before that you could see in the question and answer box, and I think they've all been answered. So I encourage you, because we don't have much time, I won't go through them explicitly, but I encourage you to look at that. We will also try to share the questions that were posted and the answers to the participants. I don't see anyone raising their hand. So if somebody wants to talk, to comment, or to ask a question, they're more than welcome to do it now by raising your hand. Not physically, but on Zoom, using the Zoom feature to raise your hand. Okay, so I don't see anyone. I also don't see any more questions coming up on the Q&A box. So I would like to maybe ask now, you've been answering to specific questions on the poll. So I would like to ask now if it's possible to share the results so we can go through each of these questions.
Hi, Hanan. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like I can go back to the previous polls.
Okay. 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 Yeah. Okay. No problem. No problem. I was only able to, I can only see.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm wrong. Hold on.
Okay.
We can go back to item A, item 2.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I'll share those results.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much, Sharon. Thanks a lot. So the first two questions were on the first item, that the main concepts on tourism and the different types and forms of tourism. The first question was whether tourism refers exclusively to arrivals by air and cruise ships. I think most people, 91% said that it was false, and this is correct. So I think there was it was obvious that for everyone that this is not the only this is not only limitation of tourism, doesn't limit only to air and cruise ships. The second question was on stated that traveling to a country with the only aim to get vaccinated there against COVID-19 is tourism. Is this true or false? 56% said this is true, 44% this is false. Indeed, the majority is right. This is true. According to the recommendations, this would be a tourism trip, as it would deal with issues of health. We saw that was one of the main purposes for trips. Maybe we can move on to the next ones.
1 second.
Yeah, no problem. Perfect. This was on expenditure. The amount paid for a mandatory COVID-19 test prior to visiting a country is not considered tourism expenditure. This is, again, 53% said false, 47% said true. Indeed, again, the majority is right. This is false because this should be considered as tourism expenditure, according to the recommendations. Again, I encourage everyone to look and to explore the guidance document that we put together. You'll receive it later on. So this can be a very helpful document when compiling this, when trying to answer these types of questions that sometimes can be quite confusing and can be a bit tricky. Then finally, the term tourism industry is equivalent to tourism characteristic products. This had to do with item 4 on tourism industries. 56% said false, 44% said true. Again, the majority is right. This is false. There are two different concepts: tourism industry and tourism characteristic products. So with this, I don't know if anyone has any comments, any questions to the presenters. One last chance to raise your hand or make any comments. I don't see anyone, so I think that means everything is clear. So I'd like to, before closing up, I would like to maybe move on to what is the 7th item, the conclusion, key recommendations. I'd like to maybe summarize a bit of what we've seen and what we've explored today, and what potential next steps could be. So I think the main objective of this workshop was, one of them was to underline and highlight the importance of tourism statistics and what can be achieved with good tourism statistics as well. This is mostly on the first day, this is what we went over. In addition, today we also try to cover more technical issues that are of importance to the region in tourism statistics. We try to cover issues that were specifically important to the region based on the questionnaires that countries had responded to in advance to the workshop. Of course, it's clear that the short time we had is an important restriction as to how deep we can go. But I think we were able to discuss issues in a relatively good detail. Hopefully, and we at CTO and UNWTO hope this contributed to a better understanding of tourism statistics and TSA in the region. And also by sharing the very good practices that are present in countries in the region can also serve as an inspiration to neighboring countries and other countries that participated. Today we saw that data in the Caribbean in some aspects of tourism can be scarce. At the same time, we have seen some very, very interesting initiatives in countries of the region in the measurement of different aspects of tourism. One of these aspects is, for example, the measurement of the sustainability of tourism, where we saw very, very interesting experiences from Jamaica and Aruba yesterday. We have also seen that this seems to be one of the priorities in the region, according to the polls that we conducted. It was also demonstrated that while these activities, these initiatives can seem very intimidating at first, that they are also feasible and the results can be extremely useful for policy. In this context, just like yesterday, I'd like to invite countries in the region to participate in the MST initiative of the UNWTO, and I encourage them to start measuring the different dimensions of sustainability of tourism, and also tell them, of course, to feel free to contact us if there's an interest in the country. On the other hand, we also saw yesterday that according to poll results, the main obstacles for the implementation of TSA and the development of tourism statistics in the region were the lack of cooperation between data users and producers, something that also came up today. And also in some cases, and the second main reason, main obstacle was the lack of technical expertise. These issues, as well as the measuring of the sustainability of tourism, we think that could be addressed very well through initiatives such as the regional capacity building programs that were described yesterday. These are very effective tools to address these needs and have proved very useful in other regions. If resources can be put together to this end and there is an interest, it could be a very interesting next step in strengthening the tourism statistics systems in the Caribbean. From UNWTO, of course, we're always available for these types of initiatives. So please do not hesitate to contact us if there's an interest. We believe that such an initiative could be a very helpful step towards realizing all the great potential and the interest in tourism statistics that is present and that we've explored today in the Caribbean. It can also help foster intra and international cooperation and collaboration in the region. Finally, I would also like to thank you very much, all the attendees for your attention during these long 2 days. I would really like to thank the excellent presentations that we've had during this workshop. I would like to thank especially also the CTO team. I think this was a great collaboration between CTO and WTO. Very, very, very fruitful. So Faye, Sean, and Sharon, thank you very much. And also to Mr. Walters as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And finally, I would also like to thank my team, Clara and Lendry especially, and also the experts that participated as well, Kevin Millington and Kepa in this event. That is all from my side. I would like to maybe pass the floor to Faye. If you have something to say, the floor is all yours. Again, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Hernan. Thank you also to everyone who participated, who presented, as well as attended. We hope that you found this session useful, and that the information that you learned at least one new thing throughout the time. I know I certainly did learn a lot. We will be, just so you're aware, I know lots of people have been asking, we've gone on quite a few questions about it. We will be sharing the presentations as well as the recording from today, as well as yesterday. And so you can look out for that via email, the email address that you used to register for the actual workshop. We will send you a link with all of this information that you can then use and refresh as a refresher, share with your teams internally. And again, I want to thank in front of everyone here, team at the UNWTO, for reaching out, well, I shouldn't say reaching out, for agreeing when we reached out to work with us on this. It's been a couple of months of planning, and I'm happy with how things turned out. I'm glad that you are as well. And I trust that our members also are happy with the way the last 2 days went. We look forward to other opportunities to work together to reach our similar goal, which would be the positioning and rebuilding of tourism globally. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. We will also be sharing the contact details for the team at the UNWTO. So if you wish to contact them directly, you can do so as well. Thank you all.